Game begin.
All right, hello and welcome to Spy Colony, episode 36. I am here with the big heavy car rolling down the hill. Michael J. Flores.
This is not even an analogy that people are aware of yet. You're gonna, you know how I feel about analogies, and you're gonna. Oh my God! This is what are you, a Hot Wheels car?
And that makes me the Hot Wheels.
You're the Hot Wheels car. This is. Oh my God! I have 3 hours of this to look forward to.
This is a very apt analogy because actually it really does summate us in like a perfect analogy and our styles. So I, of course, am referring to a episode of Mythbusters, which was quite fun, where they took a full-sized, whatever car and pushed it down a hill, or got it started rolling down a hill against a Hot Wheels running down, whatever 200 yards of Hot Wheels track. And they just wanted to see which car was faster, which car would travel what distance the quickest. And of course, the slow car, the big car, takes a while to get rolling, but eventually it will, of course, turn all that inertia into a distance that will outpace a Hot Wheels car. But, for the first some distance, the Hot Wheels car goes much, much faster. And so the question just becomes, where do you put the finish line? And of course, I find this to be a very apt Magic the Gathering analogy.
20 points.
Yeah.
And we spent like 3 hours last week talking about whether or not I should go first or not in the red deck versus goblins matchup. I don't want to talk about this for 3 more hours.
No, I mean, I think it's just a general analogy. It's just like, are you going to add more weight to your car? It takes a little bit more to get going, but you're guaranteed to go farther. Or are you going to take weight away from your car? It's just tempo versus value. And I think it's
leverage. There's just a terminal point at 20, right? There's a terminal point at 20. You either stop people from getting your 20 or you get their 20 faster. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm actually saying that strategically speaking, it's two different things, right? One, some decks are concerned with getting the 20 done, and other decks are concerned with simply getting farther down the hill, right? So like, for instance, Lan still doesn't really concern itself with where the finish line is until much, much later in the game.
Yeah, that's how come sometimes we lose by decking ourselves. The first time I ever played Bill Ellis at a meetup, he was playing U-Rock. I was going to say Lanny Rock, but you're Lanny. U-Rock, I was playing Lan still. I decked myself, won game 2, and then... Or maybe I didn't win game. I didn't win the match. I was annoyed because I thought that I was the world's foremost expert in the blue-white Lan still versus Lanny Rock matchup at the time, and I managed to deck myself. So I was very salty at Bill Ellis. I can't believe how nice he is to me still after our first encounter with one another.
Nice.
I have since calmed
You've softened up
about how much I care about winning random matchups at a meetup. Right? Like I used to care a lot.
Only slightly.
But I used to care a lot. Like now I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Everybody's
now we have tournaments every other week.
Well, I'm also just friends with everybody in the community now, like versus people were just like strangers at one point. I'm like, you know how I feel about strangers. Just stab them in the eye if it means I get one more point in the Swiss.
True. 3 more points in the Swiss. Anyways, I think it's interesting to think about. I mean, I just like, it's just like some decks win with 0 cards in their hand, and some decks wins with very many cards in their hand. Some
Sam Black likes to win with many cards in his hand.
Yeah,
I like to win with no cards in my hand.
That's not true at all.
Sometimes I like to win
close to true.
Sometimes I like to win
with the last 2 decks you played. Intuition for Deep Analysis and Gaia's Blessing. Return Eternal Dragon for 30 turns.
I just did a mini version of the Fearless Magical Inventory about the deck I chose for the 1K. I mean, like, it was so. I mean, I don't even know what stupid criteria I have in my head. I was just like, I wrote about it in Non-Idiots, and I'm sorry, Spike Colony Premodern. I wrote about it. I was just like, I don't know if I had like imposter syndrome or like, well, if I win, then I'm like, oh, look what a genius I am. I won with a spice deck. And if I lose, I'm like, oh, of course I lost. I was playing a spice deck against real decks. And I was just like, what am I even doing? Like, this is a 1K and I'm just like using it. And I look, and who cares about what is it, like $30, $50, whatever we paid to play? Like, who cares about incinerating that money? I guess I do kind of care about that. But like, on the other hand, I just like threw away an opportunity. You know what I mean?
Well, it's just how you want to spend your afternoon, right?
I mean, I just should have played my red deck and vindicated my choices to go second in every match, even though there wasn't a single beatdown deck.
Yeah.
Always second.
Well, guess what? Everybody had sideboard cards, right? Every single person was like, okay, well, too bad I had red sideboard cards today. It's just the moment you take them out, the moment.
I was actually thinking about just playing 12-12 because I knew that Kaplan was going to come, and we had messaged a little bit. So I'm like, I bet he's going to be on Psychonaut with Sabo's Web. He's always on some version of Dreadnought, right? But because he was asking me, he's like, oh, how were the Sabo's Webs in that 1K? So I'm like, I can do the math on these questions,
Yeah, I mean,
I only lost to Lanny.
Well, guess what happened to Kaplan? Well, he lost to Lanny and Brian Lonergan.
I wouldn't have lost to Brian Lonergan. I beat him in the last 1K. I would have only lost to Lanny. Oh, shoot. Yeah, see, there's the problem. You can't play a deck that loses to Lanny. Like, you have to play a deck. People don't get this. It's not just like, oh, I hate Lanny. I'm going to kill Lanny. Nothing matters to me. Victory goes through Lanny Boulevard. You have to like drive past Lanny's house, egg it, and keep going to get to Victory Road. And so you got to do that. And, anytime you just play like a 12-12 deck with Sabo's Web, don't be surprised if somebody meddling mages you 3 times in their top 10 cards.
Oh man, those meddling mages were so good against Kaplan too. They're just and also, there was like a brief discussion in the Discord of just like, oh, you play blue black or blue white, and it's like, well, I like to play blue black because duress is more efficient than foil. Where I guess it's not more efficient, but it's less heavy than foil. It's not 3 cards, right? Kaplan duressed me, and I was like, okay, it's my hand's double swords to plowshares counterspell. Which one would you like? He's like, I'll take counterspell. So for the rest of the game, I kept 2 swords to plowshares face up on the table, and then I just won. Yeah,
but you're playing an anti deck that maybe I should just look at these cards. Like, I have these cards literally next to me on my desk. Okay.
Yeah.
You see them?
Just make it.
Right. Like, and I'm like, maybe I should just make the deck and train with it, because I feel like it's one of the cards I showed Lanny, which where you guys are not visually with us, are Fire Ice, Psychotog. I've got like Counterspell here, Sleight of Hand. I got the Chill Squad. Like, I have the deck literally on my desk. So it's not sleeved, but I can take all of the beautiful new orange Katana sleeves that I'm never playing either of those decks I brought at Fifth Hammer ever again. You just sleeve it up and just learn how to play it. Because I think it was after you won the PSS. When you won the PSS, I was still on kind of the Rich Shea train of like, this is a joke deck, but Lanny just got like the hecklers and like the people on a bad first date just lined up and the jokes just landed, it's like whatever the opposite of the Red Hood's last night as a human being was, right? Like he got it. And then we like played a bunch of 1Ks, and then, I was like, this is actually just one of the best decks in the format. And I think we were just analyzing it wrong. It's not bad 12-12. It's like good anti 12-12. That's also like 85. It's like 85% as good as 12-12, but 200% better than 12-12 against the best decks. So I was just like, oh, this is actually a good deck. But the problem is, I'm like a very capable 12-12 player. Like, I can execute, I can assemble, I can execute, etc. But I'm just terrified of playing empty-handed with this non-combo like foil. Hope my like 2/2 Carrion Dryad and meddling mage get there. Please, for the love of the dealer, give me Fire Ice for 2. That's the thing, Lanny.
I think it's very hard for me to evaluate too, because my number one rule with deck evaluation is to is to basically say like, if there's just like one guy, right? Like if Cyberpunker wants to tell me that Survival Madness is like a tier 1 deck, it's like, I'll believe it when I see somebody besides Cyberpunker play it to victory. And, the problem that I encounter is just like, well, I'm playing this Grotog deck, and it's just like, I was like reflecting on my performance with it, and I try not to take this like too strongly, but I'm just kind of like, well, I played this deck. Like, it's almost dumb for me to play any other deck in most contexts, because going into Lobstercon last year, the reason I switched from Replenish to Parfait was I was just like, well, I've almost never lost a match with this Parfait deck. Like my record was just
you
like
were
whatever.
On point with Parfait also.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like I was playing, like even when I was off point, like I was still just like, you know, winning everything. And it was like super straightforward. I'm actually on the same spree with Grotog. I haven't missed. Well, okay, I actually haven't missed top cut of really any tournament in the last year. That's like a Swiss tournament. But with Grotog, I also haven't.
As someone in your circle, I actually want to contest the statement you made, because I don't think that it's really true. Like you changed my perspective on how to pick decks in the format, like before Lobstercon last year, where you were testing with Fran and Tom, and you had your like little Illuminati or whatever, and I was like off to the side, and then you were just like, look. Me and Tom and Fran have decided that if you're just like anything except for Parfait or 12-12, you're fish, right? And obviously Tom ended up playing the same 75 as me.
Yeah.
I guess we were both fish.
Tom wasn't in on that because he was. I mean, he was and is too scared to play Dreadnought, which I think is reasonable. Yeah.
That's the camp I was in. I was just like, I think Dreadnought's the best, but I think people are just going to have too many sideboard cards for me. But anyway, to pedal back, when I had erroneously declared you the best deck designer in the world, I was just super impressed with your Replenish deck. And then you abandoned it, right? I mean, you unabandoned it for PSS, right? But the context was, if you're anything but 12-12 or Parfait, you're a fish, right? And that's probably true for that period when land tax was unbanned. Like, I just look back and I think about how much I like playing the red deck right now. And, you know, we fight, right? Like Lan will be like, you're an idiot if you play the red deck, and these are the reasons why. And I'm like, yeah, but I have a lot of agency that other people don't see. And, you know, we have all these angles or whatever that we talk about that maybe not everybody necessarily appreciates the nuances of. But I cannot imagine having chosen that deck for Lobstercon last year. It can't simultaneously contend with like the meltdown plan and like kind of the crash Mog salvage plan. Like, both of those cards are good against artifacts. They're good in different ways, and you're just behind a freaking Ivory Tower some games.
Yeah, you would need to be able to sideboard into like Meltdown, Crash, and also Mog Salvage Overload.
Yeah, and
just like two of each.
And the variety of one casting cost artifacts that just straight up beat you in different ways. It's just like the difference between the playability of this strategy at Lobstercon last year and like what I would predict Lobstercon this year to be is just night and day, right? So I think you're probably right. I thought Lancer was a good deck because it beat both decks, right? I beat Parfait and I could beat Parfait, let's say, right? So
yeah, I thought it was naturally favored against Parfait and 12-12. I think that
that's why I picked the deck, right?
I mean, it had edge. It's like it wasn't. The only problem was that the edge was. I wouldn't say that the edge was large enough, right?
Well, I had multiple unintentional draws. That was actually
I mean, that's another problem.
So
But I'm not clear on what you're contesting here, because I'm
contesting that you said about why you switched from Replenish to Parfait.
Oh, well, just because
you switched from Replenish to Parfait because you had decided that.
Well, no, but the reason I decided that is like because I could imagine a world in which I lost a match playing Replenish.
So
like I couldn't imagine losing with the Parfait deck. I just couldn't. I was like, what's gonna how is it gonna happen? The only way it's gonna happen is if they Meddling Mage naming Swords to Plowshares, and then whatever. But like obviously, you can lose, but it was just kind of like it was just like that feeling of just kind of like, oh yeah, like when I play Dreadnought, when I play Parfait, it was just like a feeling, just like I'm just gonna win. Like it's just like you just look at your opening hand, it's like it doesn't matter what my opponent has.
So I wanna peel back something when you're just your Cyberpunker comment, then we can move on.
Yeah.
So one of the decks that I was really excited about early on in testing for Lobstercon the previous year, right? So the one that I made top 8 with Replenish, right? So we tested a bunch of different decks. Some of the things that are meta decks now didn't really exist in the same way, but we went through a pretty good gauntlet. And I was incredibly excited to play Blue-Green Madness at the time, right? So there were a bunch of, I don't think that they differ from Cyberpunker's list enough. And I actually would contend that Cyberpunker keeps top 8ing with lists that are just highly suboptimal. And I'll tell you why in a second if you want. But the thing that I ultimately got to was I had basically the same win rates with Mono Red, which was my first deck that I liked, and Blue-Green Madness, right? So we had basically the same win rates against the field, right? And depending on who was playing, basically I thought Mono Red was favored against Blue-Green Madness, which at some point in the math problem that's points in the Mono Red pile, right? If there's like full field, right? Like I think it is, but not a blowout, right? Either deck can win. In fact, I didn't make top 8 or whatever. I guess it doesn't work the same way of the day 2 tournament at Lobstercon that year because I played my Mono Red deck and I lost to Jared Doucette playing Blue-Green Madness, right? So I thought it could go either way. But but at the end of the day, I was just like, these decks have very similar win rates across the field, like on average, like all in. I can't imagine playing the Blue-Green deck because if it's complete lack of agency, the games that you win, your first land is an island, and then every subsequent land you draw is literally a forest, right? Like you don't, and then you just lose games where you draw Yavimaya Coast or some other pain, if you have City of Brass or something, like some pain-inducing land is quite bad because you need all this green for operating. And so I know Fran has had the same argument with Cyberpunker. I mean, I've never talked to him myself, but like, how can you possibly support Wasteland? This doesn't make any sense. You need your first land to be an island, and then you need all your subsequent lands to be forests. Wasteland is neither an island nor a forest.
Well,
right?
There's a few options here. One is like pretty simple, which is just to not play days in the deck, which Fran has been arguing for as well. So I don't think that you should play.
But you just want like for. There are a lot of reasons why you want your first
yes, the optimal draw is like 1 forest, 1 island, or like 3 forests, 1 island. But I'm just saying for the sake of like, I think that the deck is like evidently inconsistent. When I played against Stan, I've played against Stan twice now in sort of playoff bracket matches, and once with Burn and once was with Mono Blue Storm, and I think he kept like a 6 that was like a 1-lander on the draw or something, and he just like seemed to mulligan a lot, and obviously I don't know his hands, but then it was like the same thing where he's like sometimes stuck on like 3 lands in different situations like that. But you also, there's also plenty of tape out there where Stan just like, double wasteland somebody into the ground. And that's the way that I see it is just kind of like, okay, well, you're obviously making yourself inconsistent to like give yourself this really like high ceiling outcome. So
I don't know. Maybe I'm going to play in the regional championship next month, right? Maybe I'll go with a hypervariance deck because I have more average respect for my opponents. But why would you ever want to introduce variance if you thought you were like, so Cyberpunker is a consistent top 8 performer, right? Like, why would you introduce variance if you were on average better than all of your opponents? That makes literally no sense to me.
Well,
right? Like
it depends on your evaluation of like what your position is. So if you need to, so there's like a few different broken things that the Madness deck can do, right?
Broken is pretty freaking
exactly right. That's what I'm saying is like, so you can have like survival, you can like have some like explosive, explosive madnessy start. You can have some like crazy grind, like where you like find all your squeeze and then you just like draw tremendous cards. I think I had a moment when I played, I don't remember I feel like I narrated this video. Or no, it was actually, this wasn't against Stan. I was like playing the Grotog deck and I was like, oh shoot, my opponent's like triple careful studied with double squeezes. Like he's drawn like, several more cards than me. And then just like didn't get there. Right. But basically the way that I see it is just kind of like, okay, well, you have this deck. It actually has a bunch of ways to catch up, either with like a draw engine or whatever. So you can like mulligan kind of aggressively. So you can like use your first mulligan as like a really bad cantrip to like fix your mana, and then you'll hit sometimes.
Interesting segue, right? So I wrote about this in Spike Colony Premodern this week. So I used to be like a big blue-green guy, right? So before I wasn't like really like, I had written The Philosophy of Fire in like 2004 or something, but I wasn't actually a red deck guy really seriously until like 2013 or something like that, 2014. Like I never really played red decks myself. I mean, I guess I played them a lot in testing and stuff, but I was really a blue-green guy. So most people know the story where like I won the first ever PTQ with The Rock, and Mike Postilnick won the Grand Prix because I'd beaten him for the Grand Prix trial. So, and then we went to Vegas, tested together. He won.
Classic Spy Colony story.
Yeah, he won the main, but people don't know the second half of this story, which was Alan Comer was out on breakers in 9th in the main event.
Shout out Alan Comer, who's a
Hall of Famer,
playing the PT right now in the same draft pod as Brian Kibler. What a throwback!
Both of them were ex-teammates of mine. So Comer was out in 9th on breakers with the first version of Miracle Grow. Right, this deck I believe had like Lord of Atlantis in it, right? It was just like the best 2/2 available, so it was like or maybe Wild Mongrel, just like very crude versions of what would end up becoming Miracle Grow, right? So I knew about the deck because he was out on breakers in 9th. So this was like, I'd never say this story, like when I was first dating my wife, she thought that Magic was just like this hyper plus value thing, because I would just go play in tournaments and always come back with a pocket full of money. So I came back and played in like a 5K and an extended, and just won it outright with Miracle Grow. So that, and then like there's Critical Mass, but I was really a blue-green threshold guy. So I feel like I have a lot of experience playing like blue-green based tempo decks, Wild Mongrel decks that use cards like Careful Study and Mental Note and so on, and just like play a guy, clock, a couple of counter spells or whatever. So I feel like I have pretty good standing in this wing of decks, even if that's not the kind of decks people typically like associate with me. Maybe I'd be a good Grotog guy as a result of that, but I haven't flexed those muscles as much. Anyway, to come back around to it, it just seems to me like your comment about mulliganing is interesting. That was always a kind of a rub that I had with Carton Ken Crooner back in the early 2000s. He's just like, he thought Madness was better. I thought Threshold was better than Madness because you didn't need a Madness enabler for your deck to work. I was just like, look, my deck doesn't require this certain kind of card to have in play, which is, by the way, easily removed in order to cast all of its spells. And he's just like, yeah, but I like Madness better because it mulligans better. And that's kind of what you were saying. Like you like a better mulligan. But which is a good segue because obviously Threshold is the best deck in Premodern, as it is the most recent meetup.
Well, regardless, taking it back a little bit to the point that I was trying to make was like when associating deck power, and this is like sort of what I think is an overarching topic that I wanted to get to, which is like in assessing deck power, I try not to use any data that comes from just one pilot. So like Tom Metelsky put out his like tier list. He put Devourer in tier 1, and it's just kind of like he can put, I guess he was very generous to put Psychotog in tier 2, which is a deck that maybe he put it in tier 3, which is a deck that he also really believes in and plays well. But he was like on a hot streak with Devourer, and he put it in tier 1. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm sure Stan puts Madness in tier 1, and Chris Tenarms puts Enchantress in tier 1, and I put Grotog in tier 1.
Okay, Grotog is tier 1. Devourer is, I want Devourer to be in tier 1. I can tell you right now, I'm a neutral third party. Grotog tier 1. Devourer, I wish it were in tier 1. Enchantress is I think Enchantress is better than Devourer, actually. Enchantress probably should be in tier 1. I think to say that Madness is solidly at the bottom of tier 2 is probably pretty generous to Madness. Like, it's just, I don't think it's very good. A guy who can't, like, he's just clearly just better than the people who he's beating with it, and he's just riding the high end of variance somehow. Like, there's just so many problems with how the deck is constructed, and it's also power level is not high. Like, of the things you could do with the survival of the fittest, he's doing remarkably unimpressive.
I actually really like this.
4/4.
I actually like this topic right now because Fran has played multiple survival of the fittest decks against me in sort of gauntlet testing on his brews. So it's going to be lost to time, but we played a little Allure Gauntlet, and we played the recurring survival combo.
I think Allure needs more data. You know, your old
I mean,
I think Allure's quite powerful.
Yeah. So, but regardless, Fran had like survival on Allure, and we've tested so many matches, and he's put survival of the fittest in play, and he like hasn't won the game in the next like 2 or 3 turns, and then same thing where. I've seen some like this trade win survival business, and like same deal. It's like they put survival into play, and I'm just kind of like, okay, I'm dead, right? And it's like you're just like not dead. And maybe it doesn't matter if you die in 3 turns versus like 10 turns after the survival hits. Like if the survival still spells death, that's generally pretty good. But I will say that what the Madness deck does with survival of the fittest is quite scary, just because. Like it, you can't put yourself in a situation a lot of times where just removing the survival from that point is good enough, right? Because like once the Madness player just like gets survival, like they also put pressure on the board relatively quickly. And it's like kind of a middle of the ground thing where it's just like, okay, for Elves, survival is like a combo piece. So if you're like, meddling mage on survival, that's like really powerful, right? Because meddling mage on survival against survival madness, they just play their deck, and they have other tools, they have other engines, right? And that's the other cool intersection, which is that Squee intersects with both the looting and the survival. So if you cut off one engine, they get the other. And then
the thing I think is cool, that is actually an underappreciated coolest thing about the survival madness deck as Cyberpunker has conceived of it, is just like getting multiple Squeeze and then just throwing them off of a wild monger and like hitting people for 5 every turn.
Yeah, but I think that's like super underrated. So right? That's exactly. I agree with that, but that ties into my point, which is just that like survival doesn't have to be like this crazy synergy enabler where you're putting their like 1-2-3 creature combo, your Hermit Feb, your Feb combo, your trade win, angry trade win shenanigans, or of course your Elves explosive turns. Like if you have survival and you put just a few guys into play, you're both not reliant on survival, but survival is good enough when you draw it that like it's still presents a problem to your opponent. And then the final best thing is like he's a deck that just gets to play counter spells.
I'm telling you, I hate myself right now for I'm saying this. I literally this is like, whatever Tortured Poet department thing is, but this is literally the boxcar against the stupid monster truck going down the hill. What you're describing, like, it just seems to me like, why would I ever want to do this? Right? like this doesn't make any sense. First of all, this deck is just on average worse than red deck. That's part 1, right? Like if you just like,
well, that's not like, but that's not
just a little bit. Yeah,
that's not a prime directive comparison.
That is
though.
Literally
that's
a prime directive.
It's not it's not strictly worse.
If you are a devotee of our early episodes, you know that we are not a podcast about style. We are a podcast about force and leverage. If you have the same matchups but a little bit worse, you don't have
the same matchups. So you're
on average. I think they're about the same. Right. So,
I mean, there's a lot of decks that can, handle, burn better than they can handle 4/4. And there's a lot of decks that can handle 4/4 better than they can handle burn.
I guess burn has the,
plus you have counter spells. Like you got to play counter spell now. Like you got to play a controlling game. You got to play a controlling game, against decks that, so for instance, I have no idea how this matchup goes, but you can conceivably have better game against it, like Enchantress or something.
Sure, fine. Just pick the deck that Burn can never beat.
Well, that's the point. That's the point of the Prime Directive. You know, it's just like you have to be strictly better.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's say I'm Lan still, like in its game 1. Would you really rather be Cyberpunker's deck than Red deck? It's game 1, right? Like,
I would rather be Cyberpunker's deck against the Landstill player that we played against.
Not in game 1.
Yeah, but who cares about game 1?
Both of us handily got him in game 1.
Who cares about game 1? It's like, it doesn't matter if you win every game 1 if you can't, if you can't close.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, you could conceivably win a side.
All right, this is too distracting.
This is what the people want.
I know, this is what the people want.
Actually, I want more tangents.
I totally yeah. I was just like, for context, I hit Mike and I was just like, hey, our 3-hour episode is now the second most listened to episode in the history of Spike Colony.
Why?
Like, how is this even possible? Yeah, what's wrong with the people? So then we go on our Facebook group.
Previous week I was just like, and Mike, we need to do 20-minute episodes.
Yeah. And I was like, Mike,
out of there in 20 minutes. Yeah. Focused topics. This is how we're going to grow.
Like statistically speaking. So anyways, Mike just goes on the Facebook group and he's like, yeah, what's wrong with you people? And they're just like, oh, well, I work 8 hours a day and I'm listening to a podcast for that entire 8 hours. And like somebody literally said, it's just like, I would really prefer it, or I really love it when you guys, kind of go off on these tangents. I was like, you like the two tangents.
The most popular was just don't talk about modern.
Yeah. Well, that's just because like people will never give up the opportunity to troll you if you open the door with like an open selection poll.
Just deserve it. But shoot, man. People love tangents. But I mean, a lot of it was heartwarming. They're just like, I listened to 100% of the episodes anyway.
Yeah.
So, whatever length they are. What?
So, tier list, tier list can't put, I'm just like, I'm not going to put Girl Talk on the tier list. I've seen some other pilots do it. Like, I think that one of the things is that, working on developing the list, is a part of it. Right. So it's like Goblins is like so settled. So Goblins is also, I am down to make changes to Goblins, but it's like not super evident that like Goblins has like this card is like,
I'm
needs work.
On like, is Ancient Tomb right? Is Ancient
No, well, Ancient Tomb's terrible? Not Ancient Tomb isn't canon. Ancient Tomb is like
you're saying it's settled, but two of the people who I like the best, you and Hoip, are Ancient Tomb guys, right? And then separately, like somebody else who I like, Fran, is a Rishodon port guy.
Well, the Port Wasteland thing is unsettled, but I mean, close enough that it doesn't matter, right?
I'm not willing to say Fran is wrong, right? Like, because he has deep-seated opinions about this that are probably like any of us. Anytime we cite matchups or evidence, like we're human beings living on a relatively spherical shaped space.
Yeah. We're making conclusions.
Based on a tiny n, right? Like, but he has some evidence that that's backing his thoughts on this. But I do think that the format is dynamic enough because of things like the rise of Sabo's web that maybe that is not as settled as even it might have been in Fran's previous opinion. I'll address this. I still have Wasteland in mind for reasons
just because you're too lazy to put the
because I literally look
you
at
just haven't changed the deck from JD's PSS. Okay,
I have this
on the topic of
Lan gave me this. Well, he made me pay for it. At your birthday party
and some Wasteland.
And then I have these things. I have the Rishodon ports. They're all on my desk. I could just take 30 seconds and change it, but. The reason I haven't, A, I am too lazy, but B, I've just never been upset with the Wastelands.
Yeah,
they're been great all the time. And Lan also likes Wastelands. He's just like, I think Wasteland's really good in Goblins. And then every time we're playing, just like, look at how good Wasteland was this game. Like it's so good with Gear 1. I mean, I guess Rishodon port's good with Gear 1 if you're.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Let me talk through this. At least on the Rishodon port side, because there's like obviously a few things at play here. The biggest one is that Rishodon port.
Oh my gosh! Look what happened.
It's a 2-drop.
I said his name and Cthulhu appeared.
I'll finish this thought. So Risen Import is a 2-drop in a deck that only has 4 other 2-drops in the form of Goblin Piledriver. So it kind of gives you those mana efficiency things. And the deck also wants to count up from 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way to 5. So it's a lot easier to get to 5 if you're not wastelanding people. And then finally, people just play no non-basic lands. So like a lot of the ways to cover your lackey starts, as you mentioned, is like Lackey Wasteland and Lackey Port are very similar, except for against Dreadnought, right? So if Dreadnought goes, if you I had a game where I had Lackey Siege Gang against Tom on the play, and on turn 2 I played a Piledriver, which got foiled instead of porting. Which would just stop Tom from combo. So he just comboed and then was able to race me, even though I had the nuts, just because he stuck the foil on the Piledriver. So the Blue-White Dreadnought deck obviously runs some targets for Wasteland, but they're not always going to expose them on their early turns.
But what has also happened is I invoked the name of Cthulhu, a dark god who summons both Terravores and replenishes, and he appeared. So Lan D Ho just appeared in our whereby room, the champion of the 5th Hammer 1K, Winamox.
Yeah, proud owner of a brand new Mox Diamond after repeatedly offering me concessions throughout the day.
But also saying he told the day before, I think, he was just, I don't think I'm going to come. I'm 30% to come.
Yeah. Well,
that's how you... That morning and was like, you should really come. And I was like... So I felt obligated. Plus, Mike really put on the charm offensive. I was just like, well, I'm not sure if I really want to go to this. And Mike's like, well, you got to hang out with all your friends. So,
and then we went to that Afghan place, and we had lamb shank solidarity that night. All 5 of us got the same dinner. I did not get it with cumin and carrots and raisins. You guys are all
you got it with cumin, right?
Oh, carrots and raisins then. I didn't get.
Yeah, we became Shank Bros that night, and we all got our knuckles tattooed with Shan Bros. No, Shan Cabro. Because
Shan Cabros, yeah. Because you only have so many fingers.
Yeah, right. So it doesn't...
You can line the thumb up so that the K is there, and then
who shows the thumb when they do that?
True.
So Shan Cabro, Lan D Ho, annihilated Lanny in round 1, humiliated me in round 2, just kept going, bulldozed his way to a very nice Mox.
Browbeat an entire room into a top 4 cut instead of a top 8 cut.
I mean, we can go. I can talk about that at length.
No, let's not. Let's not talk about the self-serving Spike Colony podcast people.
It was a real murderer's row that I faced, because I faced Lanny and you, and then round 3 I faced Bill.
Well, Mike left his katanas at home. He was like Beatrix Kiddo, but when she's buried in the dirt and doesn't pull the knife out of the closet, right? Doesn't get the gifted knife.
Are you saying that because his deck was weird?
I'm saying his deck was not very sharp.
I think he thought it was sharp, though. I don't think he knew that he was very...
Mike just put on his Kill Bill track jacket.
Yeah.
Now I'm full on Beatrix Kiddo.
Mike, did you think that you were playing a fake deck, or were you this is a deck that could take it all down?
I don't know. I really just kind of soul searched this. I wanted to play a deck with Call of the Herd, so I took a mono white control deck and put Call of the Herd in it. Because I thought Call of the Herd was good against Lanny. I thought SWB and Bill were both going to play Terravore Oath land destruction decks. So I wanted to play a deck with Eternal Dragon. So I just had a deck for the Spice tournament that had all these aspects, right? So I just I'll just play this. But at the end of the day, it was a really stupid choice. And the reason is I wasted a 1K to play a deck that I probably wasn't even going to play in the next 1K. And I had never played a game with the deck before the tournament. I was 100% theory crafted, right? And I'm just I'm just gonna play Gaia's Blessing temporal aperture. Like I against Ari, I had put, I think, 17 mana into my temporal aperture before I got a card out of it. So like
that's the thing about temporal aperture.
I had just never played the card.
Is that a good rate? Is that a good rate?
No, like the first one, because I'd played my 5th land that turn, right, to tap the aperture. Then I revealed a land. And then the next turn, I revealed like a Swords to Plowshares when like the best creature in play was mine. So I'm like, I'm just not going to cast this, obviously, right? And then I revealed a Wrath of God while I was winning, and I'm like, this is just nonsense. Yeah. So then I'm like,
so many bad hits.
22 mana in, I got like a Mishra's Factory, right? So I mean, it's at some point I snowballed, right?
Yeah, sometimes you can Decree of Justice for 0 angels with your temporal aperture.
Let me tell you, the rate on that temporal, that was the only game that I got temporal aperture going the entire 1K or whatever K it was, like nothing K.
It ended up being 1.1K because obviously the sticker price on a Mox Diamond is 500 plus 600 paid out. So
I literally eventually was like about 20 cards ahead. And but like that was a lot of mana to get 20 cards.
Oh, actually it was only 390 paid out. So it was an $890. Yeah.
No. There's what's the value on the Mink Sync?
I'm adding the value in, so it's 500 plus 300. So it's
and the Sinkhole.
Oh, unlimited Sinkhole, which got stamped or signed or something.
I thought he should destroy the Mox Diamond too, but it got stamped. But anyway, so like I had literally never played the deck, not even a single game, and like so. It was just a stupid choice. It was one of my Spice tournament eligible decks. I decided it's like not even viable for Spice because if you were to play it against I think there's going to be a lot of combo in Spice, for example, right? This deck's like unplayable in a combo room. It's just nothing but creature removal. It was just stupid. I should have just played Ball Lightning. Walked into everybody's sideboard.
Okay, so anyways, 40 minutes in the cast. We'll just give the full background. Last weekend was our Winamax tournament at Fifth Hammer Brewing. We had 13 players show up. Lan won with his take on sort of the concept that Dom Harvey introduced to the world, which was Oath of Druids, Crows and Reclamation, Replenish combo with Terravores and stuff. He's got some mulches, he's got attunement, so he's got some add-ons. We had second place, Brian Lonergan was playing the Mono Black Clerics deck. Super sick deck, super sick run. I was in third with Grotog, and
also that's also back-to-back top 8s or whatever better in 1Ks for Brian Lonergan and for you. Right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I'm unlimited back-to-backs on top 8s. I haven't missed top 8 cut. So as I discussed, because I'm awesome. And then fourth place was Kaplan, was Blue Black Psychotog. I do want to say we did a top 4 cut out of 13 players because top 8 cut is kind of crazy, but maybe we should have done a top 6 cut because so hear me out.
That's like the most incredible.
Hear me out, Lynn. So I agree with you on all counts for the top 8 cut with 13, except for one crucial thing, which is that I don't think anybody who finishes X1 should be bubbled out of a top cut at a tournament. And that's what would have happened if Sonny and Matt Perlman didn't walk themselves into an unintentional draw.
What do you do? Does 1 and 2 get a bye and you're
so you would either do wild card round, right?
No, you should just have another round of Swiss then. Yeah, that's nonsense.
Or you do Swiss
5 rounds of Swiss for 13 players.
No, I don't know, but Lanny's idea of a top 6 cut is never mind. I don't want to talk about this anyway.
That's fine. Anyways,
let's talk about.
So anyways, we did a top 4 cut. So Lan won the Mox. He kept offering to scoop to me. It was very gracious of him. I graciously denied him the chance to go home without a Mox Diamond, both on the battlefield and in the pregame concession discussions. Tell us about the deck, Lan, because the history here is that months ago, this was like in January or whatever, was the first Magic Online Premodern Challenge. Dom Harvey comes out of the woodwork, gets to second place finish with Replenish Oath deck. Not a lot of hubbub about the deck because that was the day that Fran revealed his take on the Red Green Oath deck, which, you know, obviously it took off like wildfire, or took off like a pyroclasm from there. So people kind of forget about this deck, but you start working on it, Lan, and you teased it on Mano's podcast. SWB played it at the Endless Life 1K. I played against SWB in the Swiss that time. Managed to sneak it away from him on that time, mostly because we were playing like high pressure, high time. And then this is kind of the first time you've really taken it out to demonstrate the power of the fully functional Death Star.
Lan played it at a meetup, right?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. This wasn't actually based on Don Harvey's deck, but it was after the fact. I got inspiration for watching Cam play Oath, actually, when Cam triggered an Oath without blessings and then just replenished everything. And I had never seen that before. And my mind kind of began thinking with regard to like the previous green-white deck that I had built like a while back. It's weird to say this, but like Ancestral, what's that card called?
Ancestors Chosen.
Ancestors Chosen and Achroma and Shard Phoenix and Creator Hellion and that entire suite of creatures has just been like outclassed, which sounds crazy, but you really just can't play those creatures anymore just because of the modern, pre-modern landscape. And like the Vogue thing had to do was to just flip up like giant terravores. Right. So, and as you know, I've long been a fan of Mulch. Not because of the card itself, but because I think the card has like really strong synergies and presents some interesting decision points when you're playing against control, because control decks don't want to counter a card like Mulch, but Mulch potentially can get spells that are uncounterable versus control decks, Wasteland and Manlands. And I also thought that Mulch was a natural fit with Replenish. And so I was like thinking about all of this and thinking about what you could do by flipping up a bunch of cards with Oath. And I had begun sketching things out. And then I saw Dom's deck, and he was he had already built something that was along the lines of what I was working on. So I looked at that. The main difference is that, you know, clearly he has no Mulch. His mana base is different. He does present land threats, and he plays 4 Enlightened Tutors, which I wasn't sure about. I don't think that, I mean, I personally don't like that. If I did, I would have played 4. And I leaned a little more into the Replenish cards, like Parallax Wave, Opalescence. I think he had like Sylvan Libraries in his deck. Is that right?
Probably.
Yeah, maybe that's why he had a Sylvan Library engine, maybe with the Enlightened Tutors. But I do feel that the deck is, I think it's the most powerful deck in the format, personally. I think no deck is without weakness, but I think that you can always shore things up. Like, Mike has always presented the fact that against decks like the one I played, like Price of Progress is, you know, a big, I guess, like just something to be really afraid of. And to that end, I played 2 Circles of Protection Red in my sideboard. But I think the deck is like really powerful because it attacks along multiple angles. It's a control deck. It's a deck that can just cast powerful spells, but it's also a combo deck, and it's a deck that can just get value. Like I get against you, for example. I remember I just cast a Replenish simply to get an attunement back and to get a Seal of Cleansing, and I destroyed your Mox, kind of like start attacking your mana. And the fact that, you know, like with like a normal Replenish deck, you don't like see value replenishes very often. You know, you're trying to just go off.
Well, that's not entirely true.
Well, I said very often.
It just depends on who's doing it. Some people are super into that. Like, so the most like one of the things is that Mike and I's Replenish lists weren't really built towards this, but like the sort of canonical replenish list is like, we're going to play replenish combo, but if we also do tide combo and then replenish our tide combo back, we're like pretty happy. And then I've talked to players who are just like, the combo is like opalescence plus attunement. And I'm never going to board out attunement or trim on attunements, because like an unkillable 3/3 is like the most exciting thing that I can do.
That is so unexciting.
But I'm not even getting to that point, right? Like what I just mean is like using replenish just to like get back a seal of cleansing.
I guess
right?
I disagree with that point, just because it's also just it's like a sound, that's like a tactical decision versus strategic, because like, you wouldn't say it's like, oh, well, strategically replenish will never cast replenish.
No, but other replenish decks don't really, like it's not as advantageous for them to do that. It's more like an act of desperation, because their decks aren't built to leverage.
Yeah. You have less, okay, I kind of see what you're saying, which is just that like if because it's not like an interesting thing to be doing, because you're forced to do it rather than
Land's deck can get more action in its graveyard with fewer copies of the key cards than a regular replenish deck because of Oath. That's one thing. So like if he triggers replenish, you're basically always dead. Versus if like
triggers Oath Druids,
Yeah, like if you just a regular replenish deck cast replenish, like it's highly variable how good their outcome's going to be. Like maybe they just get like Opalescence Wave is a great situation, right? Like you win most games that you have Opalescence Wave, unless your opponent's playing a combo deck. But like Land just always buries you, right? So as an example, I had Land basically locked under mana for most of the game we played, and he was just waiting to draw Mox Diamond, and then he just one-shot me.
Yeah, if Lan was just an Oath deck, then he wouldn't have won. If he was just a control deck, he wouldn't have won. But because he has a backdoor combo, which we won't get into the details of that game, because a lot of things happen.
Also, my deck isn't a real deck.
Yeah, and your deck isn't a real deck. But this would be a great time to run down the deck list. So we are looking at Lan D Ho. That's 2 Terravore, 4 Oath of Druids, 3 Seal of Cleansing, 3 Parallax Tide, 3 Parallax Wave, 2 Opalescence, 2 Attunement, 2 Mox Diamond, 4 Swords to Plowshares, 1 Enlightened Tutor, 1 Crows and Reclamation, 4 Replenish, 4 Mulch, 3 Treetop Village, 3 Wasteland, 3 Windswept Heath, 2 Flooded Strand, 2 Forest, 3 Plains, 2 Island, 1 Treva's Ruins, 2 Yavimaya Coast, 2 Adakar Wastes, 2 Brushlands, 1 Gemstone Mine. Sideboard, 3 Call of Herds, 1 Seal of Cleansing, 1 Aura of Silence, 1 more Wasteland, 1 Karmic Justice, 2 Wrath of God, 3 Orm's Chant, 1 Sacred Ground, and 2 Circle of Protection Red. So in case you missed it, this deck can just be a Terravore Oath deck that has a larger than average Terravore than the decks that run 4 Terravores, of course, because it's going to see more cards. It also has the sort of backdoor combo of oathing a bunch of stuff in the graveyard and casting Replenish, and also oathing, if you ever oath past both the Terravores, you can Crows and Reclamation for Replenish to complete the combo. And once again, the full combo is that if you have Parallax Tide, Parallax Wave, and Opalescence in play, your opponent will have no lands or creatures. You'll have infinite mana and unkillable 4/4s. So the deck does have a lot of bob and weave. It has somewhat of a high curve, but the thing that struck me about it was that tying the room together with mulch to have value is more interesting, or is more functional in some context than trying to reach your higher curve using City of Traders and Ancient Tomb.
Directly good against Oath Pollution. That's the other reason that.
Yeah.
Like we tested a lot for the previous Brewery 1K, and the SWB ended up playing the deck, but I ended up not playing the deck even though I was high on it, was because I just like went crazy over Sabo's Web to the point that I added Sabo's Web to 12/12, and Lan said he didn't want to talk to me because my mind was full of chaos.
Yeah.
Mine was full of people. I mean, like
in this analogy, in this analogy, Lan is like Professor X and Michael J is like, I guess
Wolverine.
Yeah, just something like it's just like in like Lan's like peering into his mind, and it's just so immensely chaotic, and Lan
It's just like nothing but
can't bear
webs.
Yeah, Lan can't bear the burden of peering into Mike's neuroses.
I mean, I literally, like, Mike and Steven both left, and then it felt like 10 minutes later, like they had just drifted away from everything that we had learned and talked about. Right? And then Mike was like working on mono blue cycle knot with 4 webs starting, and I was like, how did this, what?
How did we get
And I was like, well, mono blue is kind of just like a gimmick. I was like, mono blue was a gimmick deck for the meetup because it can never be meddling made. And he's like, the web is so good, and you're immune to, you're playing islands, so you're immune to like wasteland. And I was like, I gotta go. And then it kept developing along this line because I thought they would self-correct, but they just kept drifting farther and farther from shore.
And then Steven actually made the mono blue deck that week. He physically built it.
Yeah, you have to, like, Lan, you have to stay in that conversation because you got to keep, you have to anchor the people with their heads in the clouds to reality.
I was so high on Lan's deck, and then I was just like, Sabo's Web.
Oh, he was also, Mike was also like, well, Sabo's Web, defeats this deck. And I kept trying to explain to him that there were only like 3 real cards that were affected by the treetop villages. And then Mike just wouldn't get off his talking point. So it was difficult to, I mean, you know how it is when someone like has a first principle, right? You're like, well, I think it's like this, this, and this. And they're like, well, actually, I think it's just the will of God. And you're like, can't really, I can't not say, I can't not prove that. I can't prove that it's not the case. So I guess we'll just have to differ here. Yeah. These are just free market forces at work. You're like, okay.
Yeah.
But,
couldn't those be corrected by policy decisions?
Okay. Let's
regardless, with the, oh man, I forgot what I was going to say. But the one thing that, because I was looking over the deck, is that if you look at the distribution of spells, I think there are only 10 green spells in the deck, right? But you have to think about the treetop villages as actually being green spells. Yeah. The deck is primarily white, and then it splashes for 5 blue spells, but the attunements were actually like quite powerful. There would be times when I would enlighten tutor for them and they just kept the engine going, right? Like I think against Bill, game 3, my hand was 3 replenishes. And I was like, well, I'm just going to start like replenishing for value. I think it was literally, again, a seal of cleansing and an attunement. So I would just draw a card, cast replenish, destroy, one of his things, right? And then attune and then make the next replenish like a little more powerful.
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
The one thing that I also wanted to point out, which is like one of the things that the classic replenish list try to solve is basically, it's the same thing that I was saying. So you have to solve for 2 things. One is that you're filling your deck with forecasting cost cards. And the second is like the same things. Like if you do that, like 1, you got to cast them on time. And then 2, you also have to like make sure you live to see 4 lands. So I address this problem by basically being like, well, we have soul lands already, but what if, we need more than just soul lands? We have soul lands and Mox Diamond. And then Mox Diamond lets you lean heavier into City of Traders because you can play Mox Diamond under City and you can pitch City to Mox. So I was just like, instead of worrying about trying to play a Swords of Plowshare, Seal of Cleansing early game, you can just get to your 4 mana on turn 2 or 3 to start cooking right away. Oath of Druids is a great solution to the early game problem of just being like, okay, well, here's a 2 casting card spell that we can cast that has like immense leverage the moment that it hits the battlefield, and like is so much virtual card advantage that once it's there, you can pretty reliably be at 4 mana, and you have Mox Diamond and Mulch to sort of play a value game. So you don't expose yourself to like your opponent going super fast on you, and you make yourself much more resilient against land destruction. Because Mox Diamond is card disadvantage, and then also City of Traders will eventually be card disadvantage, which is all circling around to the point which is like Replenish has shown itself to be quite resilient against the red-green deck anyways. This take is pretty cool because, it runs creatures. And also, you can conceivably just play Ancestors Chosen, right? If you wanted to lean more into the combo. It's just nicer that you can cast Terravore if you draw it.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels that I guess there's a world that exists where Ancestors Chosen and those types of creatures are good again. And there was one point in the past when I had a Chroma in the sideboard, but like again, I felt that a lot of these creatures just are either outclassed or just aren't appropriate. Maybe not appropriate, it's not word, but just aren't very good in the modern landscape. And it's weird too, because I think Oath itself is not necessarily very good right now, but it feels like necessary. Like I think I told you this, but I played.
Yeah, you just boarded out Oath every game.
Yeah, I played 5 full matches, right? And I boarded out Oath in 4 of them. But that's because like Oath is a card that keeps opponents honest, right? And then, like the post Oath games are kind of more interesting because you have some room to maneuver. But like against Mike, for example, Oath wasn't great. It was threatening the first game, but I think it was just better because I think my deck just has like so many cards that are really bad for Mike, right? Mike's deck, which again, we should note is not a real deck, that I could just like set out the Oath cards.
It's a spiritual successor to a mildly interesting deck, which is the mono white stack, like
it's not a real
deck. But yeah, it doesn't feel like a real deck.
There's like Seal of Cleansing, Aura of Silence, just like cards like that are just like insanely good against Mike, right?
Yeah, like I'm investing in a bunch of non-card advantage generating artifacts, right?
Yeah,
like,
and then against you, for example, I think Call to Hurt is just like so good, right?
That's why I played mine.
Well, we can solve that problem, right? I was like thinking, so I was joking about Anarid Brushhopper, but I think what does the call think if the Grotog sideboard just plays Waterfront Bouncer?
They're just using cards to beat Call of the Herd now,
right? But you have cards, right?
But Land's deck has Oath and Plow.
Yeah, I mean, like it just becomes at that point it kind of becomes like a game of chicken with regard to the Oath. I don't think Waterfront Bouncer is a great card. Temporal Adept would be more interesting, but even both of those cards just don't seem the right card to be playing to stop Call of the Herd, which is like a weird card to.
Well, generally, Call of the Herd is truly the best card against Grotog outside of Pernicious Deed, which is, not really a big meta player. And to answer your question, Mike, the Grotog deck is really good at suppressing Oath of Druids because it just boards into Ray of Revelation. And most Oath decks don't, stack up against Ray of Revelation. Lan did put himself in a position where I had to like Ray of Revelation, Seal of Cleansing, so I could like run out Moxes just to be able to cast my cards. But assuming that the average Oath Call to Herd deck, is going to be red green or some sort of mid-rangey Oath build, I think that I'm not too worried about Waterfront Bouncer like triggering Oath so much because like step 1 for me was always just like not putting creatures into play under Oath, and Lan had the read on that, and so he just boarded out his Oaths anyways.
The best story ever with Lan and his deck was we were talking about Devourer combo. Lan played his deck in a meetup. I played him with Devourer.
Bad story. It's just a story of you being a dumbass.
I got like, I'm like, oh man, I know his list. He doesn't have Gaia's Blessing. So I got the
I just don't even know how you missed
mill kill, right? And I'm like, you don't have Gaia's Blessing. And Lan literally goes, but I do have Crows and Reclamation.
This is like the stupidest, like, yeah. I was sitting next to you and I heard this conversation and you're just like giddy. You're just like, Lan doesn't have Blessing. Lan doesn't have Blessing. And I was like, Mike, why doesn't he have Blessing?
And it was my birthday.
Why, Mike? Why doesn't he have Blessing?
And it was my birthday.
It's like, maybe he doesn't have Blessing for a reason. Maybe he wants his deck. It's like,
yeah.
had the same
a great
thing
outing for Michael J. and Devourer.
I had the same thing against. It was actually pretty funny. I ran into the same thing against Angry Hermit, but because I have a brain, I was just kind of like, oh, I'm playing against Angry Hermit. I can't alter of dementia this opponent unless they do it after casting Crows and Reclamation. Then you can do it, right?
Well, to my immense credit, I saw the line.
Yeah. You saw your deck in your graveyard, and you saw your green 1 untapped mana, and thankfully, all of your practice and the pattern recognition
cast Replenish. He just put nothing but Replenishes in his deck, so he would draw Replenish.
Yeah, he chose the right
cast it.
There were so many wrong choices for that. There was
so much power on his side of the battlefield, and so few permanents on my side.
Well, it was funny because after I said that I was going to cast Crows and Reclamation after Mike milled me, he just wanted me to play it out for a couple of. So he's like, all right, how much power do you have? And I was like, all right.
It's actually at least interesting, right?
Last week,
because you Crows and Reclamation the 2. So this is what could have happened. You Crows and Reclamation the 2. Whatever's back. Yeah. And you've got, so one, you need to have enough power in play to win on one swing, because then you're just dead, right? So you do need to have 20 power in play. And then additionally, if Mike, the one thing you don't get, you get all the lands, all the creatures. Obviously, you got all your seal cleansings, so you got all the artifacts.
Yes, that's right.
But if Mike could have just somehow gotten you to draw 1 card, or if you were just short on 20, of course you're gonna have 20 though, because you're not only do you have all your 4s as creatures, you have Oath to Druids and Seal of Cleansing and Attunement as creatures, so it's pretty easy to get 20 or 30 power.
Yeah. He had it. My
last question for you, Lan, on this deck list. It's probably not my last question, but my question for you on this deck list was, I am curious about. I mean, I guess this is just like a classic me thing, which is just something like, what happens if you don't? I guess you answer this question. It's like if you don't draw Opalescence, it doesn't matter because you're just going to continue playing mid range, and they'll eventually play Opalescence.
Yeah, there've been many times when I don't have Opalescence, and I just grind them down with Treetop Villages usually.
Right. Because Tide combo is normally enough to win, so long as you're backing it up with something. Right. And then Opal Wave combo isn't that much better than just having a wave and a seal and a replenish in the mix. So
against Bill, for example, he was. I maneuvered the game to such a point where his Sears of Resistance were both pretty anemic, and because I had seals in play, I could kind of make them asymmetrical for the turn, right? And also, his land destruction spells had become pretty embarrassing at that point in the game. Obviously, they're super devastating early in the game, and then once you reach a certain point, they become almost dead draws.
Yeah,
And I was able to just get a replenish and get rid of 7 of his lands. And then after that point, the game became pretty trivial, right? He just basically had no plays in play. He was locked under his own Seer of Resistance.
Yeah.
That's cool.
These are all, I was maybe not brave enough to play this deck the last time I was trying to play it in a stake situation, because there are some things, there are definitely some things that I'm not all the way sold on it. You messaged me the hypergeometric math on mulch. Although anyone can do this, but you sent me a little spreadsheet thing that your average value out of mulch is between 1 and 2. It's 1.x.
Yeah, 1.7 cards.
Yeah,
I think.
And
but the median is 2. That's important.
Yeah. Right, exactly, because you can't get a fractional. But I was kind of really turned off by the 1s and 0s outcomes obviously are seem really bad, even if you randomly get some enchantments in there too. But I think, the other general question is just other players, in the face of Oath are also going to want to play combo. So it seems like that might just be the other angle of attack against this deck.
Oh, yeah, it's weird because I mean, we played against the Devour Altar combo, right?
Yeah.
And
well, that's not entirely fair, right? Because if in all the worlds in which, I mean, I have so many gripes with this. One is that I can't help but feel like Mike is advantaged if he doesn't just throw the game, right? Because the fling, he just has to play the fling half the combo.
So the reason that I did what I did, which is obviously wrong, but Lan was just like building to a point where I was going to lose, right? Like his battlefield position was just going to become insurmountable because he has like the access to like all the seal cleansings in the world, right? So I just needed to take an action before he just blew up all of my permanents.
If you get tide comboed from the Devourer side, things can get tricky. I was
the bigger my window.
The bigger thing that I'm saying is that
obviously was wrong.
Like Lan's method of not dying quickly here is Oath of Druids, and if your opponent has
against combo decks, right? Wasteland is actually super powerful.
Yeah, and you've got 4 after sideboard.
And then the Orm's Chants are actually super powerful against combo decks also.
Well, the other thing is he can buy a lot of time with Enlightened Tutor and Circle of Protection Red in a sideboarded game, right? Like if you can't actually beat him with the Altar combo, Circle of Protection Red is like, it's not the hard lock because you can conceivably get out of it with Rushing River, but that's like
good. It's like
a 3-mana tax, like that at a minimum if he doesn't have other interplay.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. I think that aspect is at least quite good.
Like against Feb, right? Like you have Plow, right? So you can attack the Hermit Druid with Plow, or you can attack like the big creature with Plow. But then Orm's Chant also, like if they activate Hermit Druid and you just Orm's Chant in response, what are they going to do?
Yeah, you're not like entirely clean to if they just try to spin up. I mean, obviously you have resistance survival of fittest in the form of all your seal cleansing, but they wouldn't even probably attempt the Hermit combo against you.
I do think. I mean, but that's part of the charm of Magic, right? Like, there's no perfect deck.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'm not saying that.
What about Napster?
I'm just saying I'm just like thinking about
probably weak to light of day.
I'm thinking about like, where you would position, this deck, like in the spectrum of like what you're trying to beat and what you're trying to lose to. And I think like one of the things that's nice is that you have a very like elegantly assembled, sort of like core game plan that has a good mix of, proactive and reactive elements. And I'm just trying to like see, it's like, okay, well, what's the, what did it cost you to get to that point? And I think like the cost is, you're like a little bit slower, and you're like,
I do feel, I mean, like combo was definitely something that I was concerned with, right? But that's also why I am playing like some of the sideboard that I am. But I also do think that combo is especially susceptible to mana disruption because almost all the combo decks in Premodern have very
they get tripped up by Wasteland quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then if your Wasteland can bridge you to your Parallax Tide, which like then can bridge you to your Parallax Tide combo with Replenish, that definitely gets there. And you have some you can hit your acceleration with Mox Diamond sometimes. I mean, why don't we just put Arcane Lab in this deck?
Because I thought that the Orm's Chants were better in general.
Yeah.
Right. Because they were good in multiple matchups. Arcane Lab maybe deserves like a slot, right?
It is an enchantment after all.
Right. It is an enchantment, but it just feels that like you're playing only one tutor. It's not the type of card that you really want to replenish back because if you replenish, right, it feels like you're already winning usually. Orm's Chant, I thought, could either against like Landstill or other counterspell decks power through.
Right. It lets you. I mean, Orm's Chant lets you be proactive and reactive. I mean, I hate the reactive.
Orm's Chant's so good against Dreadnought, though.
Yeah,
right?
It's really it's like really great against Dreadnought. It's good against other combo decks, and the kicker is really good. I think against like elves and other decks like that try to attack in one turn.
Yeah.
That's why I ended up playing Orange Chant over Abeyance. Like I said, decks like this that rely really heavily on board control tend to be a little susceptible to combo decks, but I think it's no more susceptible than a standard Replenish deck, right? Like Replenish decks are pretty strong, but the combo is like slow relative to other combo decks.
That's true. I mean, you can conceivably get it on turn 3, but I think that at least if you have Parallax Tide on turn 3, like you'll have a pathway, but your hand still has to be good, right? So you don't really play a game where you're disrupting your opponent's combo deck beyond Parallax Tide.
Imagine Lan as a turn 1 or 2 Oath of Druids, and then his opponent lets him trigger it, and he has a Mox Diamond. Like he could just full combo somebody, maybe even faster than Replenish. Like Replenish needs a lot of machinery in place to get like a turn 3 combo. Like Lan would just get the machinery as a result of.
Well, you probably hit on just Intuition Replenish, just the old fashioned way of just casting Intuition.
Yeah, but I don't know. That's pretty hard to get everything you want, right? Like it's easy to get 2 pieces, but you need 3 or 4 pieces.
Well, you'll cast the third, right? So you just like Intuition Replenish. If your opponent puts the Tide in your hand, you tide them, and then you replenish the other.
No, I'm just saying, like, but if Lan just has the Replenish, opponent could just be locked out.
I think Lan has to be luckier than the Replenish player to assemble the line you're describing, which is Oath of Druids, trigger, Mox Diamond, Replenish with all the stuff having incidentally being hit with Oath versus a 2-way parlay plus enough mana to cast it.
Maybe you're right, but he also has a 12/12.
Right. No, but the other thing is that's not the only line of defense. Again, like Matt, you have Seals, Plows, and Wastelands.
Right, exactly. You're just playing a more controlling game. It's just a question it's just a question of whether like which control elements line up with threats. And Swords of Plowshares continues to be the best anti-combo card in the entire format, which is like kind of like it's a big part of this.
Yeah, if I knew that the field was going to be 90% like combo, I probably wouldn't play this deck, or it probably wouldn't be my first choice, right?
Yeah.
But I do feel that given the distribution, I feel that the deck lines up against almost any.
Yeah. Combo's just like not around, right?
What'd you say, Mike?
You think it's good against Land still?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's like
he's got mulch.
You have mulch. You have Wasteland, right? And you're just like Land still just. I was playing against Sunny, and I just was just triggering his land stills because it didn't matter, right? Which shows like my contempt for like that matchup. But I think at some points too, I was just like, well, I feel like really far ahead. I'm just gonna. I think like I just had too many cards, so I Orms chanted during his upkeep to trigger his land still, so he just like drew a bunch of garbage, right? And just had to discard.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, and then Orms call again. Super MVP, like all-star Call the Herd. Just did a lot of random work.
All right, so we're just playing Call the Herd in the Grotog sideboard. If you can't beat them, join them.
Is that a lot of mana though for the Grotog deck?
It's a lot of mana. You're correct, but in this context, right? Like if your opponent is like playing a Call the Herd based game, then you're forced to count up to that mana anyways. Maybe the deck plays Armageddon and costs 4 mana.
Maybe just breaks the Grotog Mirror. Also, it could just replace Chill. I think just having 3/3 blockers is like a lot of the way there against red. Right? Like,
well, I have the Call the Herd Mirror tech. Have you guys ever heard of a little card called Spider Silk Armor?
It's just a upside down Rancor, right?
It's all creatures get +1/+1 and reach. Yeah.
And reach. It costs 3 though, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That's nice.
Yeah. You have a hard time dealing with a 3/3 elephant, right?
Just wait till you meet a 3. Well, that's what I'm saying about Anor at Brush Hopper. Like everybody's laughing me out of the room.
Brush Hopper's not getting through his Spider Silk Armor, buddy.
I'm just saying, like you just play Anor at Brush Hopper. I'm not adding a card. Pass. I'm not adding a card.
I thought you were going to be like Waxwayne.
First you said Glorious Anthem. Well, Waxwayne breaks Terravore synergy, which is just hilarious.
Symmetry, not synergy.
Maybe we'll just play Terravor, try to put GG together in our Grotog deck. Okay.
So soon all decks will just be Terravors, Call of the Herds, and Wax Wains, and
Sylvan Library
really will be the breaker.
It's not
so
a bad
we'll have
place
to use
to
the
start.
Wayne side to unbreak it.
It does feel like we're already there almost. I will say it was funny playing against Brian in the finals, right? Which was the one matchup that I read that Oath was like particularly good against. And I mulliganed game 3, and I felt like it was a tenuous position because he's playing mono black and has a lot of discard. But I managed just to stick a turn 1 Oath. And then he was kind of in the tank on, I think his turn 2 or 3. He was just like in the tank for a really long time, stuck on 2 swamps. And I think he just went ritual, Priest of Gix, guy. So he just had like...
One of the guys was Withered Wretch. So his angle was that he was going to Withered Wretch Terravor small enough. I think one of the guys was like a Rotlung Reanimator so that he could just like attack in 4 turns straight.
No, it was a Cabal Archon, the sack.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, his plan was to like hopefully Withered Wretch to contain, like hope that you hit a small Terravor, Withered Wretch it down, get some damage in, and then by the time the second big one comes, he can either have removal spell or Dystopia. Well, Dystopia doesn't really help, but try to like put together a plan. I mean, what's really cool is that Withered Wretch does suppress the Crows and Reclamation plan. So
wouldn't the second big one just be the next turn?
That's correct, but he can attack through it and then get some Archon triggers, or if he just had a removal spell. So I don't think he had the removal spell in hand or something, or you had other things to say about his plan. But I do think that if he waited to go, until he had snuff outs, right, then he could have just gotten around Crows and Reclamation with Withered Wretch.
Oh, that's not what I was going to say. I think like he correctly read the situation and he took a gamble and it just didn't work out. Right. But it was funny the way it looked. But I was going to say that given his hand and the fact that he only had 2 mana, the game just wasn't going to get better for him. Right. Like his draw faces aren't going to be much better. Right. He's going to draw out another creature or whatever. And then my draw faces are going to be much better than his. And if I ever stick something like a Parallax Tide and he has no board, right, it feels like the game's like automatically over.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but I also think that it's interesting. You're basically saying that the gamble feels like whatever you think it is to hit. Like the gamble seemed like it was like a 1 in 5 to hit, right? Because so many good things have to happen. It's like I'd rather play like you just get flooded and then I eventually draw like a couple snuff outs.
It's weird. So this is an interesting thing that you see when you watch. And I don't know if it's still the case, but when you watch a lot of top players, right, sometimes they'll just take a line that doesn't really make sense to you. It just seems like very unconventional, and then they just like lose on the spot, right? Like the next time you're like, well, that's weird. Why would John Finkel do that? But given the state of Magic, it's one of these things where if you take this play, you're either like 30% to win the game or 70% chance to lose on the spot, right? Where if you take this other line, it extends the game 5 turns or 10 turns, but then you're only 15% to win.
Yeah. Play to win versus play to not lose. I'm just saying that I think that it's debatable how much equity the first play has because you have it at 30 and I have it at much less than 30. If it was 30, I'd attempt.
No. I just pulled those numbers out of the hat.
I know.
But I think that.
But the numbers matter, is what I'm saying, right?
No, but the longer game, I think he has no chance in the longer game. Basically, like functionally 0.
Right. But it's just the distance between him finding one more element. Like I said, like if it's a snuff out and you have the other Terravor in hand, then you can't trigger the Oath. Right. And whatnot. So like things can at least get more interesting. Like, I think it was reasonable to like try to put your, like, I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying like the odds are so low from that point. Like it's just a very, it's a very unlikely path to victory to begin with. So it's like so low that it's still a better gamble to like let you take your draw steps and hopefully like get flooded or screwed,
So are we saying that the best discard is Sword Splashers and the second best discard is Oath of Druids? Is that the
in Premodern? Yes. I mean that's always been the true. It's like literally been true probably since
playing.
Premodern existed, but yeah, definitely since we've been playing. But if it's true now, it was true before.
What do you mean best discard?
No, the best card is.
Oh yeah.
Sword Splasher's the second best card is Oath of Druids.
That's pretty undeniable. I mean, okay, so Oath of Druids is debatable. It's not debatable that Swords is the best.
Yeah. I mean, I think whatever. Given the texture of his hand, right? He was just in an ugly position, and he just had to do what he could. Swords of Plowshares seems like a great card.
Yeah.
I mean, but you do give him life, right? Like you cast a Terror against me, and then you gained like 19.
Classic Mike.
What's this? It's nonsense.
He's like, well, there's no downside. There is one downside.
Mike's like, I'm just asking questions.
Yeah, he's just asking.
It's like, I mean, like, why would I want them to have life, right?
What's kind of interesting to me is cards that like seemed, that we remember as being like really good and iconic from when you and I were playing, Mike.
Like Hammer of Bogardon.
Yeah, I was thinking like Isan Shade.
Oh, Wildfire Emissary. Yeah, these cards are all legal.
Yeah, they're stone unplayable, right? Which is like pretty funny.
Hammer of Bogardon. Could we find a place to play? I'd be just tapping 5 mana on your own upkeep in Premodern just sounds like a really good way to die.
I mean, you do it all the time, Mike. You're obsessed with it.
I guess I do. But those decks are all Swords to Plowshares, right? Like,
no, yeah, that is true. Good point. Okay.
I don't do it if I don't have swords.
Red, white, Eternal Dragon, Hammer of Bogardon deck. Have I introduced Thran Generator? What's it called? Turbine.
Oh my god, this is.
You could definitely put Plowshares in your Hammer of Bogardon deck, right?
Wow. Okay, I could rebuild my Thran Dynamo deck to include Hammer of Bogardon. What's RRR?
Thran Turbine.
RRR, because you want to cast it when you return it.
Oh yeah, that sounds great.
All you need is a Thran Turbine. So Thran Turbine, pick up your Eternal Dragon.
Is that the Soul Ring that only works on upkeep?
Yeah, that's correct.
Is it made colorless only?
That's correct.
Yeah,
and you also can't use it to cast spells.
Oh my god, this.
So just cycle Eternal Dragon or return Eternal Dragon. I mean, I think you solved it, right? Because one of the problem with the Thran Turbine deck was
this is even less real than the deck that I played.
Eternal Dragon.
You would get banned from non-idiots for whatever sentence you're about to say.
Because Eternal Dragon, you don't have enough cards to use your Thran Turbine mana on because it's just Eternal Dragon and cycling, right? But what if you also had Hammer of Bogardon?
You make a good point, Lanny.
Okay, I have a few other topics. One topic is decks that are good but are not performing as good as the way that we talk about them, mainly being Goblins and Dreadnought.
I'll be right back. But
yeah. So, Mike, what do you think about the dearth of Goblins and Dreadnought performance? Not that this is like truly any data, but Fran sleeving up Blue-White Dreadnought in a league. He's like, I got to clean up my record. I got to get back onto the playoff train. Goes 3-3. 3-3.
I watched it. I guess I gave him a little too much credit at 3-2. Here's the thing. One, Dreadnought is even more than Red deck, a deck that if your opponent wants to beat you, they can. So like the Red deck, your opponent wants to beat you. They at least, I guess everybody can. Like you can be Mengu and just play Infinite Call of the Herd and Wall of Blossoms and get there. Or you can be Cam and play like, Sphere of Law and Circle Red and Worship and get there. But the Dreadnought deck, like literally everybody can be Pyroblast, Mog Salvage, Overload, Swords to Plowshares, Meddling Mage, Last Breath, Crumble, like Snuff Out, Smother, Duress. Right? If you want to beat the 12-12 deck, you can, right? Like that's the thing. But you have to work at it, right? So I think it's kind of an ebb and flow thing. If people want to be,
you're kind of just naming good cards, though. You're kind of just naming cards that are like very playable in context outside of the Dreadnought matchup.
So one of the decks that we argue about a lot, and I know this is going to offend some of the folks in the Facebook chat, is in Pioneer. I don't like Blue-Red Phoenix. And I just think that I don't understand how it performs because I don't see any deck not destroying it. Like, not even just like being good. Like, I've never played a deck in Pioneer that didn't crush Phoenix. So I think Dreadnought is similar to Phoenix insofar that you put a lot of energy into a very specific point. And if somebody can cut you off at that point, they get disproportionate leverage back from you, right? But Dreadnought is different in that you can execute the combo on turn 1 or 2 and your opponent is dead in 1 or 2 attacks, and you have better free spell access in terms of like covering the 12/12 once you already have it. Versus Phoenix, you just have a 3/2 attacker and no counter spells. So
sounds good to me.
Well, it's the second best performing deck in Pioneer, so it must sound good to a lot of people. But that's the thing about 12/12, right? Like, its value is you just went off on turn 1 or turn 2 usually, right? You have to be blue-red typically to go off on turn 1, but you go off on turn 2 with like 2 free spell access, you're probably going to win. But people could just load up the Mog Salvages, Pyroblast, Duress, Smothers, Snuff Outs, Meddling Mages, and it just becomes hard to ever go off. That's the thing.
Just quick question. Did David Kaplan play Psychotog in the
That's correct. Yep.
I thought he was playing blue-black 12/12.
He was playing blue-black 12/12 with Psychotogs.
So he has an alternate way to win if people.
Yeah. Okay. So, but it was just, all right. Never mind. Sorry. I was just mistaken. Because when you called it Psychotog, I thought it was, but now I.
It's like Psychonaut.
Yes.
What about goblins, Mike?
Oh, also add elves to this list.
Oh, elves is just not that good. can you believe it? I
thought that, but Mike had long championed the idea that elves is like the best.
I had long championed this too. And
yeah, but what did we play? What did we play? One day we just played elves against goblins for hours, and I was just like, I could get there. And I think I quit at the point that I had a game where I resolved both a Verdant Force and a Phantom Neshoba with haste and lost.
It's true. I was just like, I don't think that you could ever win this matchup.
Yeah. And then we repeated this and I got one. I got one game. But okay, so there's like a few things at play. One, I don't like, I guess the downfall of elves is like, I'm like, I am very confused about it because, if I think about like I guess I'll say this. Elves and goblins to me occupies very much the same space, and goblins beats elves. But
that is the analysis I would have. Also.
But goblins is also a little bit shaky recently, I would say.
So I think we're currently, because I think that these things ebb and flow, but I think we're currently in an era of specialization, and that like maybe Lan's deck is the exception to the rule, but like elves, goblins, and 12/12 are all generalists. They are all decks that are just extremely high ceiling, potentially very explosive, and can beat anything, right? Versus like a lot of the decks that are performing are like, they highly rely on maybe not favorable metagame matchups, but a lack of anti-specialization, right? So the thing is, I would say it's like, maybe red-green is the best performing deck, but a component to that is simply that people did not adopt Sabo's Web at the correct speed. And if they had, or mulch, right? Then red-green would have just not been as good. That's a question of specialization, not a question of average deck power. Because I would say all three of those decks are more powerful than red green.
Yeah, I was just imagining someone playing red green, Ponza Oath, and Mike sitting down with a mulch Sabo's Web deck on the other side. Dream scenario, but I think goblins is like. I don't know if this is the case with elves, but goblins is certainly the case where the game 1 deck of goblins is like extremely good, and game 2 is like way worse, right? Just because like if your opponent has anti-goblin cards, you have to bring anti-goblin cards, so you water down your very linear strategy. And also people just, it's kind of like how people hate losing to burn, people just hate losing to goblins.
Yeah, they just hate losing to mountains.
Yeah, so it's just like not only do they have anti-red cards, but they also have engineered plague, right? So it's like a tough. These are tough things to overcome. You're bringing in like you go up to 3 or 4 naturalizes, maybe like 1 or 2 like tranquil domains, and all of a sudden you have like these 5 cards that are very specific and just don't like they kind of like water down your strategy to make your ringleaders worse. They don't have synergy of like Lackey. You have to have green mana. Right.
Well, I just think it's very interesting to pin down because this has always been true about goblins, and goblins has always been a quite good, a tier 1 deck despite these problems.
I love it. Yeah.
And same goes for Dreadnought. Like Dreadnought, like this podcast, that Mike and I think very highly of Dreadnought. I continue to think highly of Dreadnought, and I'm just trying to like figure out where you would place it now. Like if you would, so I mean. We're 1 hour and 33 minutes in the cast. It'd be important to mention to our listeners who, in case you've missed it, Lobstercon sign up goes live tomorrow. That's Sunday at 10 a.m.
Live by the time
I'll try to post this today, but okay. It goes live on Sunday at 10 a.m. And because of the live announcement, and because I want to start getting travel and accommodation set up and just like start thinking about the tournament, I was just kind of like thinking about what I think about the metagame and what I think about these decks, because my analysis of Premodern up until recently was basically it's like you have goblins, Dreadnought, and red green Oath or some form of Oath deck
is the 3 best decks.
And these decks are all very elegantly positioned as best decks because they all do something different. They all do something that's very good against other decks, and then they're all very even against each other. So goblins is a little ahead versus Dreadnought. Dreadnought's a little ahead versus red green Oath. Red green Oath is a little ahead versus goblins. So they kind of represent what I see as like an equilibrium amongst themselves, and then they all just kind of really smash like tier 2 decks.
That's kind of what I was saying. Like all 3 of those decks are like very good against, they're very potentially explosive. They're in equilibrium against each other. They're all pretty even, right? And then they all can beat anything. But the problem is, like, if you look at the decks that are performing the best right now, they're much more specialized. And the decks that they are good against in a specialized way and just absolutely hammer certain of the decks that you just mentioned. I'll give you an example, right? Like that Clerics deck has got a Maul 12/12, right? Like, correct. Absolutely, like, how could 12/12 ever beat the Clerics deck, right?
Does.
Like, it can't, right? Like, that's an example of what I'm talking about.
Okay, because I was going to ask like what you meant by decks that are doing well right now that are like specialized.
Yeah, or another example might be like Groatog, right? Which I have a high opinion of Groatog. Like,
I think Groatog is a generalist deck, right?
It's a generalist deck that annihilates 12/12.
It specializes in defeating.
Like, its specialization is demolishing a deck with
no. Groatog is essentially like proto Delver, right? It's essentially a Delver deck, and it relies on like velocity. Cheap threats, right? And then cheap answers. And so I actually built a variant of Groatog recently. I just I took out Portents because I hate Portent, right? I think Portent is just garbage. And I wanted to see what it would look like with Peak. Right?
How did that go?
What did we find?
I bet it's awesome, right?
Okay.
I bet it's going to be awesome because I think when I peek to see your, I don't know, Eternal Dragons in your hand, like, I still name Plow anyway with Meddling Mage, right?
Yeah.
But it would be amazing. It would be amazing, right? If I peeked, saw like 2 Thran Dynamos, just stranded them in your hand, and then you threw up, right?
Yeah.
And just ruined your deck and could never.
Well, hear me out, Lan. Why don't you just like portent your opponent and see those 2 Thran Dynamos on top and then continue as you were?
Well,
because like you're not straining the cards in their hand right away, right? It's just like that's future equity, whereas like gaining equity right now.
I mean, what turn is it? Is it not turn 1 in this analogy?
Turn 1 it could be. No, it's like probably like turn 3 because turn 1 I had to like slide a hand because I was like my mana's
because your mana's junk. Yeah, and then your sleight of hand didn't hit, and you're like, damn, I wish I could see two more cards with the sorcery.
So
no, but Portent's only good in the opening turns, but it's a terrible top deck.
It's still quite good as like a top deck because like the way that I see it is like Portent, later in the game is a good top deck because at that point you're just like, well, I just want to draw Gush or Counterspell. And then with Counterspell, it doesn't matter if you pick it up on their upkeep, and then Gush is just Gush. It's like, okay, well, at least I drew the Gush instead of waiting 2 extra turns because I cast Peak.
Lanny, like we the two of us often lament the Landstill player who defeated us so badly at the Bearded Dragon 1K. That would be another example of, I think, like specialization. That guy did not want to lose to us, right? And so he didn't. But
Wait, Landstill's not a specialized deck; it's a general deck.
It was specialized at defeating red.
Specialized defeat, but
Mike is using specialization in a very general context.
As a corollary, the deck that Ashok played is definitely not a generalist deck. It would always lose to Oath-Replenish, right? But it is insane against the red decks.
Okay, Mike is saying that the decks that are succeeding have polarized matchups.
That's what I mean. But they're polarized matchup based on the selection of highly specialized spells, not based on the matchups could be polarized because of general spells. Like I'm talking about like these decks have Galena's Night, right? Stuff like that.
So here's the question, Mike. These polarized decks are succeeding. Do you think they're going to be more successful or less successful when you're about to play 8 rounds of Lobstercon instead of basically 4 rounds and then draw in at a 1K?
I don't know. I think like the metagame could be radically different by Lobstercon, so I don't want to say right now.
I don't think that metagaming Lobstercon is a particularly a good way to go. The metagame for Lobstercon is going to be still similar amounts of chaotic, where it's just like, sure, there's like a moderate likelihood that you're play against Burn twice or play against Dreadnought twice. But like last Lobstercon, I played against every tier 1 deck at least once, and then I played against 4 tier 1 decks and 4 off meta decks. And like, so I played against 8 different archetypes in 8 rounds, and and then
I played against Stasis and Enchantress, and the rest of the decks I played against were tier 1 decks, and Stasis and Enchantress are at least meta decks.
Yeah, but like
Enchantress, I would think is a tier 1 deck, right?
No, I said I played against Stasis and Enchantress.
Those are the off meta decks.
Yeah,
the rest
we're all tier 1.
I think I would consider
Enchantress
and maybe not in terms of representation, but in terms of power and ability.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like to Lanny's point, I played against all real decks, right?
Okay,
I played every round. The weirdest deck I played against was Stasis. Stasis is a deck everybody knows, right?
Yeah.
And I think I played against Enchantress twice, maybe.
I would put Stasis outside of my expectation for playing. I don't expect to play against Stasis the Lobstercon. And then last year I played against Survival Welder, which I accept could happen. I played against Blue White Tide, which I accept can happen. I played against Dredge at Home, which is definitely not going to happen.
I don't know what Dredge at Home is, and I probably said that on this podcast.
Yeah, you've said that on this podcast. It's just like a zombie infestation blue black deck. And then the rest of the time, I played against Mono Blue Dreadnought, Landstill, Burn, and Sam Black's Parfait. This is in the Swiss at least, because once it's in the top age, it's going to be meta decks and whatever Flint brings. So I don't know. It's just like, it's interesting because like one of the I think you do make a fair point, which is that Kurotog is like really good in that it's really good against goblins and Dreadnought, and I think it's okay against red green. Obviously the Call of the Herd plan is a little bit frustrating, but I mean, I expect to solve that over the course of the next
scoreboard does not say it's okay against red green.
I expect to solve this Call of the Herd related issue over the course of the next 60 days maybe.
My argument is I don't think that
like Lanny's like Neil Borg trying to solve quantum mechanics.
Like I don't think red deck even beats Groatog anymore. That's the thing, right? When I beat you at volleyball, that was like the last time. I'm like, you're too prepared. I needed you to double mulligan, and that's how I won.
One thing that I wanted to kind of just like bring up also is that when you guys were talking about like the pillars of Premodern earlier, right? It was a Goblins, a Red Green Oath, and 12-12.
Yeah.
It used to be that Land still had Pride of Place right?
It used to be elves, red, mono red, and land still were the pillars, right? And
right, but I just mean like land still. The only thing limiting land still is red green oath or just oath, right?
In what way?
Well, it's what's preventing land still from doing well, right? Like if like the oath deck didn't exist, land still would still be a playable deck. I think it's like not playable now because of two things. One, because the land destruction decks and Sphere of Resistance are just so bad, right?
But the proliferation of Sabo's Web just
that's a splash damage, right? Yeah, I agree, right? But I think that like being able to play all those like land, like spell lands, essentially, right?
Yeah.
It's just devastating for the land still deck.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. But you know, yeah,
I
it's
just mean
interesting.
like if the 12-12 decks, right? So
this is the way that I see it is that one of the problems is that even if land still was like theoretically good in and around Lobstercon and then theoretically good afterwards, it didn't have like crazy representation. Like it's always
Lobstercon last year.
Yeah,
didn't it win
won the
last year?
tournament, and there were multiple copies of the top.
I understand, but collectively, it didn't produce a high win rate. So I agree that obviously winning the tournament is a big point for land still. But then in the months following Lobstercon, it didn't really seem like a hot deck. Like it wasn't hotter than Blue White Dreadnought in the months following.
Yeah, part of it. But when did the Oath deck come into fruition?
January.
Not until after
January of this year.
ban.
So I'm talking about the time in between.
Like October.
Yeah, but so
Green White Oath Peluche became a thing first.
So yeah, I understand, but land still was like arguably good against Green White, depending on the preparedness. But like in September of last year, after the land tax ban, or even before the land tax ban, it wasn't like land still was just like dominating, right? Just because it won LobsterCon didn't mean it was like a huge meta player. Like I think my analysis is that I would say that land still was a deck that was seen to be a huge meta player going into 2021 LobsterCon, and then 0 players played it. And then for the year following, it had roughly that play rate where it just like wasn't popular. It was just David Daniels and Brian Selden. And then obviously the people have full foiled out land still just like continued playing it. And like Europeans. And Europeans would play it, but it just wasn't like I've never thought about land still as one of the highly represented decks. I know it's like a flagship pre-modern decks, and a lot of people think about it as like this like super popular deck, but I personally feel like that's overstated. Like, sure, there's always land still players, but like not more so than burn players or goblins.
It's
players,
super overrepresented in our community, though, right? Like, if we have a large meetup, and I'm saying like meetups that are north of 12 people, 14 people, there's often 2 land still players.
It was when you were playing it, and Lan would bring it, and Sunny always plays it, and then Jordan was coming, but
but there's other people like Spencer would play it, right? Like. You know,
but that's kind of that.
Mitch would play it,
but
right?
that's relatively fallen off, right? As you and Lan have moved on to other decks, Sunny ends up being the only land still player remaining. So, but anyways, I agree that it's slightly overrepresented in our meta, but now it's slightly underrepresented in our meta. Like I think it shows up sometimes, but. I haven't noticed it in very many top 8s. I know once again, shout out to the homie in Worcester. I forgot his name already, but he just plays it every week. But I think he moved on to playing Growth Hog sometimes.
I wanted to interject about this. Sunny's just guilty of playing too much land still and not winning any meetups with it.
Once again, land still is the rock in this.
But Sunny was so dialed in with his food chain deck at the meetup this week. Like, I mean, I know I beat him for the meetup title, but like, I kind of wanted him to win. Like, he played really well. Like I mean, I would equate it to like when you went in the tank a lot in LobsterCon to like think about what your line was. Like, Sunny was so carefully constructing like what sequence of creatures he needed to play in order to get what chunks of mana. Like I'll give you an example. I made the mistake of just casting Rampant Growth on my second turn, and he just annihilated me on his third turn by getting like he started with like a Land War Elf on his turn. And he ended up with a kicked Desolation Angel, right? And you know, obviously, I'm not going to be able to beat a 5/4 flyer on turn 3. Maybe that's not obvious, but he was able to easily beat me that way. And like he had to like maneuver to get the 2 white, right? To get the black, right? To go up with the chain. And it was really cool to watch. He's super dialed in on his food chain deck.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible that it's just like a huge unlock where the pattern of thinking's clicked for him a lot better. You know, we actually talked about it because I was just like telling Sonny, I was just like, I think that you should play like a naturally powerful deck at Lobstercon. This is my advice to anybody who is they're going to compete. They want to capture, you know, as much equity as they can. I think a lot of people think that they're not good enough to top 8 a tournament that's going to go 8 rounds and whatever. And I think that they then parlay that into being like, well, I'm just going to play a rogue deck or a fun deck to kind of do the same thing Michael J does, where he's just like, well, if I lose, then I can just blame the deck. But
I did it one time.
That's
that
fine. That's fine. You know, it's okay. Like, I'm not saying that that's wrong or that's bad or whatever, but I'm just saying it's possible that you're underestimating how much work a good deck can do for you, and how little things actually need to go your way sometimes in order to top 8 a large tournament. Like, it's still statistically unlikely for any individual player to top 8 a tournament that has 200 people in it, but you have a bigger chance than you think. And so that's what I was telling Sonny. However, if you are super dialed in and you actually do have a deck and it's very interesting, it's very off meta, and it has a baseline power level that might not be at the top, but is close enough that you can make up the additional edge by being unpredictable for your opponent, you know, then by all means. I think my analysis is like, well, this food chain deck seems kind of vulnerable on, you know, the combo requires a little bit too many pieces to get going, and then its endpoint is not like shutting the door, right? So he like turn 3 hypnoxed me twice, and I was just kind of like, well, I can also just draw plowshares, and then we returned to the game that we were playing. You know, I got to a point where I like burning wished for Wrath of God, and then he had the opportunity to Desolation Angel me the following turn. But all these things were, you know, that margin of like executing the combo and still potentially losing, you know, is a little bit too large.
It was really cool, and he's obviously put an enormous amount of mental energy into it, and it super showed. Like I was very impressed playing against him, and I was obviously very happy to see him turn 3 hypnox you twice, because it sounds like you got what you deserved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, it was, I think it's a super cool deck. It's super interesting. And, you know, it only gets better from here, right? So you just play it, and that's how things go, right? It starts off as a spice deck, and you just keep what works and get rid of what doesn't. Speaking
of which, we owe our decks today. Today is the due date. Is that correct?
That's correct. So we're going to submit deck picks today, and then next week we are going to be playing the Tournament of Spice. So super hyped for that. But yeah, I mean, Lan, like, what, you know, do you have a deck selection calculus that for a large tournament that you feel, you know, is something that you would use? And then also, do you think that Premodern would be any different for you, you know, versus, let's say, if you were to play some sort of contemporary, you know, format in a large field?
Well, a lot of it depends on how known the meta is, right? And one thing that's really interesting about Premodern is, while the card pool is known, the meta weirdly shifts, right? And we've discussed that. We've implied that quite a bit on this podcast already. If it's a format that where the meta is like largely unknown, where I would tend to try to play something more proactive and more powerful, right? This was the case at like Pro Tour Chicago 99, for example. I ended up just playing Tinker. Pro Tour Caucus 99, I played Red Blue, Tinker Wildfire. But at
your deck won the tournament, didn't it?
Yeah, 1st, 2nd, and 8th. And then Clegg got 16th. And I ended up in 61st. I started out 7-1-1, lost 4 matches in a row, and then I drew my last match. It was, but also like, I mean, whatever. Casey McCarroll like gave the deck to his friend Scott Williams, and I played against him, you know, and so I had like a mirror match that I shouldn't have faced for some reason in Casey just got the deck from Ben Rubin. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
That was super weird tournament. I went 2-5, didn't make day 2. I won 7 game 1s. So something went wrong if I won 7 game 1s and went 2-5.
I mean, I'm not a magic scientist, right? But it sounds like your sideboard was not very good.
Yeah, you think? So I was playing against Alan Comer, who I believe also made top 8 that tournament.
He did not.
He did. Oh, Zvi did. Same deck, right?
Yeah. I don't know if they played the same deck, but Zvi made top 8.
Yeah. So I beat Alan in game 1, and it's like and he's got like multiple artifacts in play, and I tap R2. And he's like, oh shit. And he's like putting all of this. He didn't say oh shit because it's Alan Comer. And he's just putting his whole battlefield into the graveyard. And I cast Rack and Ruin. And he goes, oh, thank God. I thought you were melting down for 2. He just put 2 artifacts in his graveyard and killed me.
Yeah.
I'm like, but Rack and Ruin's a 2-for-1. I got you.
Right. So
meltdown.
I mean, this is a pretty common calculus, right? Which is to be more proactive in an unknown metagame and be more reactive if you have an idea of what you're going to face up again. Like, is there like, do you feel like, I mean, the Oath deck is kind of a mixed strategy though, right? It's a little bit of each. Yeah.
That's why I think I mean, obviously, I'll probably bias because I played it, right? And I did a lot of work on it, but given the fact that like no one else I knew would be on it, I didn't really have to worry about mirror strategies very much. And so I thought it was a deck that had a lot of potential across the spectrum. Like it had an active strategy versus decks that were more reactive, and it had a reactive strategy versus decks that were active, which I think is a good sweet spot, right?
Yeah,
because it's a deck that can bob and weave.
I'm going to switch my vote. I think if I play Lobstercon tomorrow, I'd play Lan's deck. It's like it's actively quite powerful. It has a highly customizable game plan, and it also has Call of the Herd for you. So
and Spider Silk Armor now.
There's like
yeah, dude. So that when I bring my Call of the Herds,
yeah. So I'm
just gonna double block, Lan. Like
I feel like
no, it just stops you from attacking, right? And then the rest of the game, you're casting like. Meddling Mage or like Querying Dread.
And like Mage isn't even good against Lan's deck. That's the thing. It's just like
it is in Pika Mage.
Instead of Growatog.
I actually think that Growatog is like actually fits the bill quite well on what you described, because against control decks it takes on like this like it just like does Get and Gush against control and mid range, and it does post sideboard Engineer Plague creature removal plan.
That's my number 2 pick. I would have said Growatog, but I would have to practice a lot. But until like Lan started talking, I'm like, those would be my top 2 picks for the exact same reasons you guys are saying. They're both high ceiling decks that can beat a lot of things, and then are also highly customizable. To win matchups narrowly. So. And
kind of like a point that I brought up before. I think after you guys played the Bearded Dragon 1K, and I talked about it a little bit earlier with Goblins, is that like decks like Burn and Goblins, they have like their linear strategy, but they certainly don't adapt well, right? Like after sideboard, your opponents will do things against you, and these aren't decks that have good anti strategies, right? If that makes sense, right? Like Goblins, I think like the only deck that Goblin sideboards well against is Elves, and it already like crushes Elves, right? Like you bring in like you're crushing Elves, and then you bring in Pyrokinesis, and then your second Sharpshooter, and then you're like Gem Palm Incinerator, and it feels like overkill almost. But you do make your deck like more focused. But against other decks that don't want to lose against you, they bring in their like anti-Goblin cards, their anti-Burn cards. You don't have a real good strategy against those decks, right? But you do want to play a deck, I think, that has resistant anti-sideboard strategies.
Yeah, right? It's kind of like sort of related to this is just like how much equity do you put in winning your game 1s? Because like it's like very clear that like Goblins and Burns are the type of decks that always win game 1, like win game 1 an enormous percentage of the time. And then if you're at 30 or 40 for the next 2 games, you're still it's still not bad, right?
Yeah. So the thing that I would say, just to echo what Lan said, was we used to have this paradigm, which is like if you just land a Cursed Scroll in the Growatog matchup, the game's basically over, right? Like
not against Call the Herd, baby.
Well, yeah. So you've Call the Herd. Well, you haven't even put Call the Herd yet, right?
It's happening.
Okay, I believe it's happening.
It's happening until I need to find. I think there might be something better than just Call the Herd, but it might just be Call the Herd.
Let me finish my thought, and then you can wax about a freaking 3/3 in your Growatog deck.
Two 3/3s. How dare you?
So, and your deck is always 2 lands in play. You're gonna flashback Call the Herd. Anyway, the thing I would say is that like used to be like if you just land a Curse Scroll, like game's over. Like Growatog just always loses if you land a Curse Scroll. It's just almost insurmountable. But then you customize the deck to add specifically Chill, Winter Orb, and Armageddon, which Chill is a narrow card, but like Winter Orb and Armageddon are tools that are highly valuable against the Rock, against Landstill, etc. But then just cut off the Curse Scroll angle of the burn deck at the same time. And I think that's a really good example of what Lan is talking about. Like your anti-sideboard strategy is
proactive.
It trumps their sideboard strategy, and Winter Orb and Armageddon are also sweet against the Rock and Landstill, which gives you cover
benefits.
Yeah. Like, I mean, Growatog has always been a very elegant deck in that way, and like making it more elegant, is sort of like the goal is just like kind of streamlining things. Is like that's why, initially it was also just things like not playing Pyroclasm in your Meddling Mage deck, and then now it's just kind of trying to find where you can add those little more margins. But notably in the PSS, say again.
People played Pyroclasm in Meddling Mage decks.
Growatog,
yeah,
they did that. And they did this without Spider Silk Armor.
Yeah.
What were they thinking?
They didn't have the knowledge. They didn't Scryfall up Spider Silk Armor. I think if they did, they would have gone to 4 Meddling Mages. But yeah, I mean, my very first
How many
tournament,
people do you think are just like pricing Spider Silk Armors right now? Because what ends up happening is whatever card that isn't hot yet that we talk about literally sells out that week.
Cool Stuff Inc. Promo code Flores.
Like I can't get a Sabo's Web. I can't get a
Well, Sabo's Web is not us. It's just it's really
there were
Fran's
22
fault.
Sabo's Webs the week before we started talking about it. I'm like, oh, there's plenty of Sabo's Webs. I cannot get a Sabo's Web now.
Oh,
I
actually bought mine from Tales of Venture.
I bought gold boarded
Lobstercon
Sabo's Webs because those are the ones I could get, and so I guess I'll borrow yours again when I need it.
By the way, I am kind of blown away that people actually play Pyroclasm in Growatog.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think it was good. I still sometimes see it, but to be fair, I also think Peak is pretty horrible. But
yeah, I think Peak is bad because we played it 12, but maybe it's great in Growatog. I don't know.
You guys have fun. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, show me your hand.
I mean, yeah.
He's gonna know if you have a Spider Silk Armor.
That's true. It's true.
That's
so he can hold his disenchant effect, which he was going to use on my Mox.
Well, he's really knows if he needs to side in Ray of Revelation for game 3. That's the thing really getting the value on.
I'm like, you're at the bottom of the deck, friend.
I think the best thing that you can do for Growatog, as you mentioned, I think the best thing that you can do for Growatog, which I think is super interesting, is still trying to find a way to cut Chill. Like, I think that's the last.
I think you just cut Chill.
That's the last remaining bastion.
I told you, I don't think it's a good matchup anymore. And I don't like. I beat you with 2 Chills in play, right? That's the thing. Chill wasn't the thing that.
There's a few
me up.
things that are kind of tricky. One is that your deck contains City of Brass, which is really rough because all of your like cards besides. Okay, so if you cut Chill, like you also don't want to run Hydra Blast.
You can play Thran Quarry, the rich man City of Brass.
Yeah, Thran Quarry might not stay in play against we can just board in Lotus Petal. like
now you're cooking.
Now you're talking.
Yeah.
Can I interest you in a Thran Dynamo?
But I
That's
just
the card I played last week.
I didn't play Chill in PSS because my plan was just to not pair Growatog against potential burn, even though I did.
Oh my god, you sound like a genius.
Yeah, but
did anyone even play burn in PSS last week?
Will played burn, and I queued Growatog against
it. Weird that I would accidentally bring that up. That's super weird.
Yeah. Anyways,
because that would never happen, right?
So we wanted to do Hidden Gibbons. We wanted to do Tempting Worm. Neither of those tested particularly well. Aaron Dix was just like, okay, I'll deal 5 to the Tempting Worm. What else you got? I'm like, well.
I'm out.
Yeah. So So still kind of
This
trying
was
to
my
figure
whole
out.
plan.
But maybe call the herd. Well, because it was like crazy. Because it was like, oh, okay, I'll try tempting worm.
In that version.
I'll try tempting worm, and I'm just like, oh, I have these tempting worms. I still have the mulligan to the stupid tempting worm, right? Because it's like, what am I going to do otherwise? Because you're so behind. So I think it's still unsolved. I think it's still good for the gander to try to figure out. Maybe call the herd is the answer. I don't expect it to be.
How
if tempting
can
worm,
call the herd be the answer if tempting worm isn't good enough?
Well, that was the next sentence I was going to say.
That makes no sense.
Which is like, but you were like, cut the chills for call the herd. I was like,
yeah, that's because I think chill is bad, not because it's not that I think chill is bad. I'm just saying like chill isn't doing what you need it to do, right? Like Winter Orb and Armageddon and the counter, those things are doing the thing. Like when you Armageddon me. Like I had to draw a very specific sequence of spells to beat you, right?
But that's because I had a chill in play.
And then I drew the spells and I won, right? Like so the chill didn't even stop me, right? But a 3/3,
the not having the chill would have almost certainly not stopped you, though.
Well, you would have just been dead.
Yeah, that's
I would have killed you with Fire
point.
Blast. You had to Armageddon because otherwise I would have beaten you with Fire Blast. And if you didn't have the chill, I would have Fire Blasted you in response.
You're making a lot of arguments for chill here.
I mean, you had like 5 sideboard cards and still lost.
Yeah. I need to do something different.
What's wrong with Hydroblast again?
Hydroblast feels only slightly less narrow than chill because you bring it in for burn, but now you can also bring it in for goblins, a matchup I'm already like fairly confident in.
But the chill shuts down Curse Scroll in combination with his mana denial really effectively. That's one of the reasons. Because the problem we had before is if you ever land a Curse Scroll, Growthog always lost. Like if you didn't have a mana control element, because they could never keep a creature in play. So you just gear 2'd them and beat them with whatever.
Yeah, I mean it's like you needed to have Psychotog, you needed to have like some crazy Quirion Dryad, Double Daze, Gush foil backup. Because like once you get a 4/4, you're not in bad shape, right? Because then they got to spend 2 cards. But until that point, it's not a great place.
Yeah, but it's not even a lock if they have a Curse Scroll.
Yeah,
right? They just
but it's like so. Does your attitude change if you have a like? I mean, this is just a metagaming question in Magic. So you're kind of pointing out this like, okay, these proactive decks that can't really pivot, can't really bob and weave effectively. Like, do you think that when is it correct to play goblins or burn? Is it just never correct in your mind?
It depends on. Well, if you're a player who is just all in on burn or goblins, right? Like that's just like the deck that you don't know other decks, right? That's one time.
Well, let's just say like a purely competitive reason.
Okay. So if I were playing in a tournament and I was like equally good at all decks and the tournament was a large scale tournament and I really wanted to do well, I think I would not bring a deck like Goblins or Burn. Especially Goblins or Burn, which are both known quantities and decks that people hate losing to, right? Just because like those are the types of decks where people are just going to have sideboard cards against it. Be like, well, there's going to be goblins in the field. There's going to be
so
if you play a deck that's not those decks, you actually gain some equity by the sideboard space that are wasted on these decks.
So would you like, let's say for example, obviously this is not the case with goblins or burn, but in very, very, very polarized metas like Affinity or Hogak, it was often seen, despite all of the hate, despite people having main deck Oxidized Viridian Shaman nonsense, besides people having main deck Leyline of the Void, it was still just like overwhelmingly correct to play these like decks that you could hate out.
The Hogak is right. Like before they begin, like I guess like the first ban was Bridge from Below.
Correct.
Is that right? Yeah. But I just mean like that deck was like potentially like a turn 2 win. It just like made no sense. But it was just like Hogak and Affinity were both decks that were there weren't enough answers to those decks, really, given like the problems that they presented for those specific formats, right?
Okay.
Whereas like Goblins and Burn don't have like the infrastructural support, like they're just not as powerful as Hogak or Affinity.
So
can I? I just want to ask Lan a corollary question before we get too far afield. I know that the people like the tangents, but like a thing that Lan has recently accused me of is not brewing very much. Like I just play like other people's decks or whatever a lot. But at the time of Affinity being at its height, like with Skull Clamp in Standard, right, the most popular decks were Affinity and Goblins, and then distant third would have been like Tooth and Nail. And at the time, like one of the best decks I ever brewed was like the green white. We never had a name for it. It was just called the green white deck, right? And it dominated the U.S. Open that year. Kibler went undefeated in the Swiss. It was really clever because we sideboarded into Tooth and Nail after sideboarding. Like we were like a little bit worse of a Tooth and Nail deck, but we had every base covered, and Kibler still lost. And look, I think our overall matchup against Affinity was about 90% because it was absolutely overwhelming. It was one of the reasons why it was so good. And then Kibler ended up still losing to Affinity in the top 8 against Billy P because he drew all 4 Skull Clamps in the deciding game. So I don't know. Like there's just some decks that like you could have the perfectly brewed deck for the metagame. And
I mean that's why we played Magic, right? Like no matchup is 100%, right?
Yeah.
That's why.
Well, the question just becomes to me is just kind of like what like people are still going to play Goblins and Burn, right? Yeah. And it like, don't you see like my struggle here? It's just like, okay, well, if the game theory of this is just that like Goblins and Burn needs to be so low that running sideboard cards for him is incorrect. And then at that point you can play Goblins and Burn. And your argument is like, we're clearly not at that point, right? They're overrepresented and sideboard cards for them are overrepresented.
You have to play sideboard cards in a big tournament, I think.
So the other thing is, right, so Goblins and Burn, especially Goblins, right? I think Goblins are especially good versus like combo decks, right? Which are both kind of like fragile. And, I know you guys were talking when I joined the cast about like Rashadenport in Goblins or Wasteland.
Yeah,
right?
that was the discussion point.
Right. And then, both of the cards are quite good against like most of the combo decks, plus like the fact that you can just play like Turn 1 Lackey into, anything, right? And combo decks really can't afford to like stop you. I think the Goblins act as a natural predator to a lot of combo decks, but I think that the field right now just isn't friendly to either like aggro or creatures, especially because like of the prevalence of Oath, or to combo to some degree. I mean combo because of like Sphere of Resistance and land destruction.
Yeah, right.
Like we're being pushed towards the middle right now.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're being
I feel that I completely agree with that analysis because like, I mean, not to say that like I played a lot of different decks, because basically my decks are like Replenish, Grotog and Dreadnought. And like, I dabble in other stuff.
Red deck Goblin.
Yeah. I mean, it's got, well, I play everything for gauntlet purposes, but like, as far as like what I was taking to tournaments, it hasn't changed between Parfait. It hasn't changed since the PSS between Parfait, Replenish and Grotog. I did burn just to humor you and to prove that, I was correct about everything at all times, which did come to fore. And
the one tournament I ever play red deck that I don't win, you were right. That's that. That doesn't sound right to me. Just in case you were wondering.
So my range hasn't changed, but I have felt the effect. So one of the things was that I started picking up the Mono Blue Storm deck recently. And one of the things about the Mono Blue Storm deck is that you have to get very lucky to win very quickly, but you don't have to get lucky to win slowly. And I did come to this point where, like you said, it's like aggro and combo are getting squeezed. Like the average turn length of a pre-modern game is just longer. So, like one of the things is actually kind of interesting, which is like, and that's why I took days out of my Grotog deck because I was just like, well, I'm not pinning anybody before turn 6 where like I just like catch a daze. Like most of these games, they're just scrappier. We're going to later game, and I need more
substance.
Yeah, I need Armageddon, right? And I need plowshares. Like I need to be able to exchange a card. And like I said, this mono blue storm deck, like I've been playing it and I was like, dude, this deck is like really, really good. It's got accumulated knowledge, which plays really well into this, like, okay, well, we're going to play a lot of turns. Then all of a sudden I have an engine, right? I have Merchant Scroll accumulated knowledge, and it's an entirely spell-based engine. You can't cut it out. You can't cut it out for me unless you have Graveyard Hate, of course. So that kind of shift in the meta.
Graveyard Hate isn't even that good, right? It just hurts your AK engine. The rest
that's all, yeah. But fine. I mean, if you have a random main deck Phyrexian Furnace, then that's something, right? But that's my point. I'm just like, it's a caveat. I'm saying that you can't disrupt AK, right? And it's like, well, you can, but not really.
Yeah. I mean, no one is bringing it. Well, I would hope no one would bring in Graveyard Hate against Mono Blue Storm.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I would have it over Plowshares, but even Plowshares counters a snap, right? But yeah, so I've been playing it more. You can beat Guy's Blessing. The only time I failed to beat Guy's Blessing was when I boarded out my Words of Wisdom because I just didn't believe my opponent would have it. I was playing against Life Combo, and I was just like, how much Flores does this guy listen to? Because if he listens to a lot of Flores, he's going to have Guy's Blessing Abeyance Lock in the end. But if he doesn't, because he had the BB1 from Scourge, pay 3 life, put a +1/+1 counter on your unspeakable symbol. And I was like, well, he has a win condition in his deck, so why would he play Guy's Blessing, right? And then I was like, okay, I'll board out the Words of Wisdom.
What's better than one win condition?
Yeah. So anyways,
the reason I played Guy's Blessing in Abeyance is because then I don't have any win conditions and I just have a lock.
You're not beating people down with Tireless Tribe, or
I mean, if it goes to it, you just
what's that 1/3 called?
You just wish for the
Daru Spiritualist.
No, not that 1/3. The other 1/3, the Rebel one.
Task Force.
Yes.
I mean, against Etai,
not that 1/3. That's when you know you have a good deck.
There's like 7 1/3s in the main.
Okay. Anyways,
some of them cost 2, some of them cost 3.
So Storm has been really impressive and resilient to me, especially where your opponents give you extra turns because it's just such a good draw go combo deck and it's so hard to interact with.
It's also ignores Oath.
Yeah, entirely. Yeah, and that like flips this other thing, which I thought was really interesting. The moment I added Swords to Plowshares to Grotog was when Landstill. Obviously, you can play Plow against Landstill. It's like totally defensible, and you'll get a card out of it. But notably, Parfait and Replenish. And Oath-Druid decks where like Plowshares is generally quite weak, or sorry, not Oath-Druid decks. Just Landstill and Parfait weren't like Replenish and Parfait were one of the big reasons. Replenish, Parfait, and Combo were one of the big reasons that you wouldn't play Plowshares in the Grotog main. And with all those gone, all of a sudden it was just kind of like, yeah, we should play Plowshares main because like Daze isn't hitting, Plowshares is hitting more often. It used to be like you're naming Plowshares with Meddling Mage all the time, and sometimes you're going to strand multiple Plowshares in your hand. Like they're worse than lands if they're not live for you. And that's crucial for the Grotog deck that operates on such a low resource. I think it's very well put that the metagame has basically squeezed aggro and combo a lot. Not that it has necessarily stopped people from playing it, but it's definitely made them lower performers, and the question will become is like if people respond to that in time for a giant tournament.
Yeah, it's it definitely seems like those decks are less well positioned right now.
Yeah, which is not to, I mean, that's the thing is like we're still going to go to Lobstercon and Burn and Goblins are going to be one like in the top 5 represented archetypes.
Yeah, because I mean like a lot of people. I will say that a lot of people don't necessarily own like every deck. Right?
Yeah, that's related.
How many rock decks do you think will be at Lobstercon?
I think there will be fewer rock decks this year than last year. Last year, I think there was up to 10 or something. But
so 5%,
something along the no. It's not a 2. It's the last year was a under 150 tournament.
So 7.5%.
Yeah.
That's non-trivial. I mean, like.
We can pull up last year's.
You know what the win percentage was? 44%.
44 change.
just like I always said.
Wow, it outperformed by 42%.
Let me actually pull it up.
I mean, like, yeah.
It'll be interesting to pull up. So Land still had 15, Parfait had 14.
Does the Parfait include also
the Rock had 13, so it was 7% of the meta. Because the total was
Lanny was Parfait. Is that include Sandblack?
Yeah. All tax rack decks were lumped into Parfait, and they were relatively split between Parfait Oath and Blue Parfait and Mark Voigt's Blue Parfait.
Wait. So was Rock the third most represented deck?
Let me sort the sheet.
Sorry, because when you said Land still.
So in order of popularity, 21 Burn, 17 Stifle Knot, 15 Landstill, 14 Parfait, 13 Rock, and then 8 Goblins, 7 Elves.
Okay.
Oh, so Burn is the most popular?
Here's an interesting question for you guys. Can you think of a single good card in Rock?
Pernicious Deed. Wall of Blossoms.
Duress is a great card.
Huh?
Duress is a great card.
Is it? I like the rest of the
I don't think it's a great card. I think it's so Patrick Sullivan and Cedric on their podcast or they're on the Receivables were just like, my favorite thing about black green players is that they'll be trying to explain to you like this cool synergy in their deck, and they do that just by reading what a card does.
Oh, I have this argument all the time. People like Pakula does this every now and then too, and I make fun of him. Where you ask someone, well, why is this in your deck? And then they just read you what the card does.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, well, why is the rest of your deck? You're like, well, just spend 1 black mana and you look at their hand and you make them discard.
Yeah. Gotcha. I mean,
a non-land, non-creature spell.
Yeah. It's but that's the point of the Rock, right? It's just like you're just putting all the 7s together.
Yeah, but
and then the end result is
the Rock
a
is
5.
like 50% of Land's model. It's a take on all comers deck, except for it's in the wrong power quadrant. Yeah, it's like instead of high ceiling, it's like the lowest possible.
I mean, I don't want to. I just think about George Carlin's old joke when I think about like the Rock. He's like, well, I've never been with a 10, but I've been with 5 2s. Right. So like, yeah, it's like not really all 7s. You're putting a bunch of like 3s together, right? Like, put it this way: like any deck that you're playing right now, like in Grotog, right? If you drew a card that's like a mainstay in the Rock, right? You would just be embarrassed to do.
Yeah, you're like so
Treetop Village,
Treetop Village, Wall of Blossoms,
Dust Bowl.
Like some decks are pretty happy to have Wall of Blossoms as a defensive option against.
Great.
Yeah.
Those are a lot of qualifiers.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you see, for 2 mana, I get to draw a card and I get an 0-4 wall, which is really good with my
really
other
bad
card
in some matchups
where I pay 1 black and I name a card, and then later I sacrifice a creature.
If you play a Wall of Blossoms against the deck that Lan played last weekend, you lose 2 different ways. That card triggers Oath of Druids, and then if he casts Replenish, he just kills you with the Wall of Blossoms.
Yes, it's my favorite interaction. But
just like, you would like to draw cards? Would you like to draw?
Well, the Rock can play Call the Herd main deck. It's even better.
Cards.
Yeah. The other thing that's amazing is like, given the Rock, right? You're like, well, we have all these cards that are like kind of below average against the field, but after sideboard, we should have. But you actually don't. You actually don't bring in any good cards. The deck doesn't transform into anything particularly good. It becomes somehow more of itself.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you started with some number of Naturalize, add a few of those. You add Engineered Plague, boom. And then sometimes you board out.
Then you've got a stew going.
Yeah. Sometimes you board out. Look, this is an unfair podcast because we're just like 3 people with varying amounts of disdain for the Rock. So
I love the Rock. I also acknowledge it's not good.
So this is like Pro Tour LA 98, the Tempest block constructed Pro Tour.
The day one with the
where the format was like really polarized between mono red and living death. So everyone was like, well, you either play
Trade Wind Bottle Gnomes.
Yeah, you either play Disenchants or you play like Lobotomies, right? Because it's like like disenchants are great against like the curse scrolls that were endemic, but were terrible against like the living death decks and vice versa. And John Finkel played this like pretty bad Esper control deck where he had 2 lobotomies, 2 disenchants, and after sideboard he was like, well, then I went to 4 and 0 respectively depending on the matchup. And to me, that's what kind of like the situation you presented with the Rock. You're like, well, sometimes the naturalizers are good, and
yeah. I mean, sometimes you draw your cards in the right order. I
played a deck with Ancient Tomb. So you were like turn 3 Lightning Elemental, right? Like that was a thing Dave's deck couldn't do.
Oh yeah, we went turn 1 Jackal Pup, turn
Lightning Elemental 4/1 haste.
Yeah, but with Ancient, this is a block constructed for.
Oh yeah.
But we also had like turn 2 Stone Rain, right? So we'd go like turn 1 Pop.
Okay.
Stone Rain, turn 3 Lightning.
Because you don't sacrifice the Lightning Elemental, you could just get in the next turn.
Yeah,
I mean, Kibler had a game where he was just like turn 3 Wrathy Dragon YOLO, and he got there.
Okay, so I wanted to bring the burn thing back up because I actually kind of felt compelled. Sort of by what you were saying, which is just that like people hate losing to burn. They're not going to lose to burn, but isn't like the flip side of that just like a lot of decks are sort of naturally dogs to burn and they have to shore up that weakness so much. Like I think about my Grotog deck. I think about how much better it would be if I didn't have to run chills, right? And then not only do I have to run chills, I have to get really clever with my Armageddon Wrath of God plan. And a lot of decks have to do this. And if a lot of decks are doing this,
right. So
and they play against not burn in round 1.
Yeah, you're losing. You're giving up a lot of equity. So the interesting thing is, it's just like what you're describing is a situation where you kind of built your deck with a very specific like anti-burn plan, right?
Yeah.
And then you ended up kind of like losing some points when burn doesn't exist in the field,
but
right?
That's because we play against each other so much.
No. I respect burn in a Lobstercon.
Yeah. For example, I think the deck that I played is soft to burn just because Price of Progress is just so devastating.
Yeah.
Right. And as a concession to that,
you had to put sideboard cards. Yeah.
Yeah. Even though in my heart of hearts, I thought that burn was going to be underrepresented in the field, I thought that just the humiliation of losing to burn,
right,
is such that I had to include 2 beta Circles of Protection of red. Right.
Well, were we talking near mint or
No, of course not.
Of course,
right? I'm not. Yeah, I mean, I'm not Sunny. Right?
Okay, fair enough.
Mad, right? I'm just man on the street. Man on the street working a second and third job to like feed his fix, which is HP beta cards. Right.
Fair enough.
But I also had a Enlightened Tutor, so I could in theory fetch the Circle of Protection red, and like. I know Mike has always like, or not has always, but has gone on talking about, well, here's how you beat Circle Protection Red. You're just like cast Seal of Fire and just hold it in your hand, and then you have.
Well, you can't beat Cop Red plus Tide combo. So
yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Right, so you just like attack their mana.
It's easy to
like
beat
Mike is right that you can beat. Mike is right
like,
that you can beat Circle quite easily. And by quite easily, quite eventually, but. Yeah, if you have other things to say about it, but I mean I think burn is very unique in that way, where the tools that you need to fight burn are very, very fixated on burn, right? So life gain cards and red hosers aren't particularly good in a wide meta. Whereas like if you're trying to fight goblins, you're just kind of like, well, I've got these engineered plague. I happen to hit elves and not Devourer combo. And like weird stuff like Enchantress. Like I played against Cam at the brewery, and he sideboarded into his Ace Peacekeeper plan because I boarded out all my Plowshares and Fire Ice. And then I was like, that's a human. And he was like, yeah, it's a human Peacekeeper. And I'm like, what's Argothian Enchantress? And he's like, well, it's a human druid. I'm like, okay, I'll play engineered. So the blunder I made, it was on the table. I had Plague in hand. I thought it had 2 toughness. I like looked down at the card and I'm like, well, surely this is a 1/2. It costs 100 mana. It costs 1 mana plus 2 on every upkeep. And then I looked over the card again. I was like, oh, this has 1 toughness. Engineered Plague naming human.
Peace comes at a cost.
Yes, it's true. It's true.
Kibler did I tell you that story that Kibler famously made that mistake in the semis of a Pro Tour?
That Peacekeeper has 2 toughness?
No. He had stopped with the Creed and was playing against Kai. And he he saw. I think he knew that Kai had a
Megetta the Lion.
Yeah, Megetta the Lion and a Lincivian play, and he could have just named Saba's Decree for Legends and gotten rid of both of them.
Oh, and he just
named Rebel.
Yeah.
Instead. So yeah. So you're following in Kibler's footsteps.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean,
he's won a bunch of Pro Tours.
I think of myself more as a John than a Kibler in the context of Premodern, but I'll take.
Well, you're more of a Kibler.
Wow, that's devastating for me. Because I always just say that I'm John and Fran's Kibler, because I can't ever beat Fran, but I can beat everyone else.
So
but maybe you're John, Lan. Maybe that's actually the deal. You don't ever play, and then when you do, you win.
One thing to echo your point though, right? Like I had to come a similar plan for goblins in that like I had the 2 Cop Res and I also had the 2 Rats of God.
Yeah.
In the sideboard. But I think that like so the other thing about red is that like decks are soft to it, but I also think that and you guys have definitely talked about this at length, but red just the card quality in burn is just not very high. It's so low, in fact, that you're willing to take like a delayed draw over a normal draw.
That is correct. Yeah.
Right. So
I mean, our last topic was: do we cut Incinerate for Seal of Fire?
Right.
Like,
which was like basically cutting a 6 for a 6.1. Could like arguably 6.1.
It's a 1 casting cost 5.7. Right. Like,
it's yeah.
I mean, because like the argument is like, well, you know, there just aren't enough good cards to go in this deck, so let's just like. You know, not take a draw phase right now.
Yeah.
Right. So we draw more.
I fundamentally agree with this, and that's why I play, you know, only what I perceive to be good cards. The way that I see it is that Incinerate and Seal of Fire or Shock are also practically unplayable. They're just like a support.
Bad.
They're a support cast for Pups, Mogs, Lavamancers, Fire Blast, and Bolt. Yeah. And I think that Sulfuric Vortex, it's also a support tech class.
The high end of the burn deck is quite excellent. Like Fire Blast, Lightning Bolt, Ball Lightning, Curse Scroll are all insane.
But fundamentally, Lan, right? It's the same thing I'm saying with Mono Blue Storm, right? It's just like it's very hard to interact with Mono Blue Storm. You can beat it with sideboard cards, right? But burn functions in that same way. It just does something that people have to bend over backwards to deal with. And like, sure, if you choose to bend over backwards, you'll never lose to burn. But you also, you also make a sacrifice, and burn can find the line. Goblins is just kind of a middle of the road version of that same thing where people have more flexible answers against you, but you're also more flexible deck, right? You have real card advantage in your deck where burn only has virtual card advantage.
That's like a really good point about like goblins versus burn in certain contexts, right? Like Cam, for example, will be so happy to play against me if I'm playing burn. And he has a very good reason to over the preponderance of our matches. He's won all but one when I'm on burn and he's on Enchantress. We've played a lot of times, right? But sometimes I play goblins, right? He's just like, I don't want to ever play this matchup, right? And the problem is you're eventually just going to get them, right? Because you just land a Tranquil Domain and kill them that turn.
Like, and consider what Lan was saying, which was that goblins has to play bad anti-goblins cards. It's like, well, burn playing anti-burn cards, like after you get past Sulfuric Vortex, like Flaring Pain and Anarchy are atrocious. Like they're super, super bad. So goblins, at least the anti-goblins card is like Tranquil Domain. It's like, well, you get value from Tranquil.
Well, it's a very powerful card, and it's also it's surgical, right? Yeah. Like you cast it and you just win that turn oftentimes. And I think
because you can't imagine playing cards like Tranquil Domain and Burn, right? You just can't do it.
Right, exactly.
Like, yeah, I just don't see. I mean, there's no real way to transform Burn after sideboard that I could think of.
Unless you added colors, right? And that would screw up Fireball.
No, you wouldn't. I mean, you wouldn't transform after sideboard. All you do is that you you basically, like, the best transformation, right, is that you get to have Price of Progress sometimes, right? You're like, oh, sweet. Like, I can get these shocks out, and then I can play shock for 100, or like you get you just cut the fat, right? You're like, oh, my pups aren't good against their walls, or my ball lightnings aren't good against their counter spells, and then you just kind of change things around. You put Hydro Blast. Your strategy becomes clearer, but you don't really access a different thing that you were doing game 1 and game 2. You just do your game one plan a little bit better, whereas your opponent does an entirely different plan that's like a lot better.
Yeah,
but you get 2 shots.
Yeah.
One of them you're on the play.
Yeah. You're on the play in game 3.
Go, Jackal Pup.
If you're playing, you keeping Jackal Pup in. So anyway,
It depends on the matchup. I get
if you're playing Burn in the modern environment, right? You're kind of like hoping to catch lightning in a bottle, right? Based on like everything you're saying already.
Yeah, you might start off 0-2 in a tournament and then just battle back to the winning $1,000.
So Lan, all I'm saying, Lan, is that instead of your framing, which is that you have to get lucky, I'm just thinking of it like you have to not get unlucky, right? We were really unlucky that 3 straight Burn players ran into blue-white 100 sideboard cards before somebody else did. Because if anybody else played against blue-white 100 sideboard cards for Burn, they might have kept them in the 0-1 bracket while Mike, me, and Ty, worked the tournament. But we didn't.
Work the turn. Anyway. But what
Cam was also there too, so we have to dodge him. But
I played against Cam also.
What I'm saying was that, right, if you're playing Burn, you're hoping to catch lightning in a bottle, right? Trying to YOLO anyway, you might as well just play 4 Price of Progress starting. Like, fuck it. Right? You're just like, well, my chances aren't that good anyway. That's gotta
be better than Shock.
Yeah, right. Just try. You're like, well, if you run against like mono blue Storm anyway, it's like, you're like, what are you guys doing, right? Are you guys at the cafe on a Tuesday, right? Just meeting up for lunch?
Oh, you beat Mono Blue Storm after sideboarding, though.
No, but that's what I mean. It's just kind of like a weird situation where, yeah, your Price of Progresses aren't good against this Mono Blue Storm, but
Oh man, I'm almost gonna get sold on this if it weren't for the fact that like Seal of Fire kills Goblin Lackey, and like random Mother of Runes and like, I don't know, Mishra's Factory sometimes.
Yeah,
and an elf.
There are a lot of bad cards you can remove, right? It doesn't have
That's true.
And you can
some good ones.
No, but you don't have to remove all of them. You could like, you can just like shave. You're like, well,
we could just
maybe 3 Seals of Fire is the right number.
We could just like add land. And
I agree that you don't have to play 4 Incinerate, 4 Seal of Fire. You can just freaking play 2 Incinerate, 3 Price of Progress, 3 Seal of Fire.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm in, honestly, because then I can just add more sideboard cards. Then I can add Flaring Pains and Anarchy to my sideboard.
Oh my god, this is horrible. And
yesterday,
Lanny and I were fighting over if Lava Dart was a playable card.
So here's the thing about Burn, right?
Lava Dart sucks.
Let's say your opening hand, you have like multiple Seals of Fire and Incinerates. That's not even something you want to draw in like limited. Like, right?
No, but that's the point. Is that you only want to draw it because you have a lot of it. You can't have some. You can't have one's okay, but you can't have some. You have to have all of it.
This conversation has just reminded me. Well, of 2 things. I got to go watch the Cavs game in a minute. But the 2 things are, I so often have games where I draw 3 shocks. Happens all the time. I never have games where I draw 3 lightning bolts. It's just
we throw 3 what?
Yeah, because they're dead after the first 2.
Bullshit.
The only reason you see the shocks is because they don't end the game and the bolts do. Like, this is a very obvious explanation.
Well, I'm just saying.
You're like, I very rarely have games where I see a lot of Korean Dryads because the first 1 or 2 kills them.
Yeah, I really have games where I'm replenishing back Tide, Seals of Cleansing, Opalescence, and Waves multiple times.
Yeah, it's exactly. Burn's a specific thing. I think goblins and elves, that I think what we're describing really is holding it down, is that a lot of decks have naturally good game 1 strategies, and then their game 2 strategies are just completely great. And then but what's weird is that mid-range also kind of sucks too. It's like the Rock and Land still aren't particularly good, just because
don't you think
Rock is naturally bad?
Everybody in these situations just becomes a grinding mid-range deck, right? But
they're just like a better one, and they do it game 2 and 3 instead of like starting game 1 with a 40% flip and then improving to 55 in game 2, right?
I'll just say something that Zvi told me at PSS last year. He says, I don't think that the Rock should be one of the 3 decks that you have in PSS, but comes a time
when if you do have Rock,
if you have the Rock, that it is the correct deck to choose.
So the other thing is like I often think about post cyborg games of Magic as like playoff basketball in the NBA, right? Where plans kind of like fall apart, and like in playoff basketball, you have like these streamlined offenses and stuff. But then if you look at the game scores, right, like teams that were scoring like 120 during the regular season are now struggling to score 100 points. So that's because like defenses go up, people are more dialed in, they know what they're up against. And things kind of fall apart, and you go into more ISO basketball a lot of times. So that's why it's important to have shot creators and ball handlers. And similarly, in Magic, post-cyborg games, right, you have these plans, but sometimes like they don't fit in perfectly with the deck as you conceived it, right? So you have like these kind of mismatched parts, and the games become
you've got pyroclasms and meddling mages.
Well, and you're struggling. You're like, I can't find my spider silk.
Can't find my.
So like,
I didn't draw my naturalize.
What do you think about like pre-modern versus contemporary Magic? And I don't mean that about it literally. I mean, I think that a lot of the time people in pre-modern are sideboarding like it's contemporary Magic, where you have the option to play cards like Mog Salvage, Pyroblast, Chill, Perish, right, Engineered Plague. But people just oftentimes play cards like Swords to Plowshares, Gaia's Blessing, like generally Phyrexian Furnace, like generalist cards in their sideboards for tuning purposes instead of swapping in hammers. And that's actually something I've been thinking about a lot, right? Like
because the meta is more wide open, right? Like you want like a plow is good against any deck with creatures, but a perish is only good against like essentially like elves.
Yeah, but a perish ends the game, right? Like versus like a plow, it's just like that's just your main deck card, you know.
But it depends on the matchup, right? Like you could bring in a plow versus like X% of the field, like any deck with a creature. But like, would you even bring in a perish against like Terra Oath?
No.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's why.
But a plow is great against Terra Oath, right? So
right, exactly.
So like, just as an example, right? We're submitting decks today. Like, I think Lanny was the one who told me where my deck has 13 sources of white, right? And like, how do I not have plow? It doesn't make any sense. Like, I could just sideboard plow. That's got to be better than most of the cards in my sideboard.
It's better than every card in your main deck.
But
it's the best card in pre-modern.
Yeah, but it's just not appropriate to play in my. If you look at my deck, it's just not really appropriate to play in my main deck, right? I think.
I don't think so. I don't think that you need an intuition for upheaval. You can stand to play 1 or 2 upheavals instead of 3.
I don't know. I had intuition for upheaval against Sunny, and it felt great.
Yeah, if the intuition is for 2 upheavals and a plow, right? Like,
probably getting the plow. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah. I think the next iteration of the Spice tournament should be like everyone should bring the rock. All right, so everyone has to play the rock.
Same 75.
Oh, actually, something like no. Every like there's a certain base of cards that you have to play. Like maybe like like maybe everybody has to start with Wall of Blossoms and Pernicious Deed as an example, and then like they get 15 cards. We see like how far afield and how creative you can be, and you have to start with these cards.
Yeah, and then like. But so the thing that's the most interesting about that tournament format is, right, so if everyone in the tournament is playing the rock, how does rock maintain its 44% win percentage?
True. Somehow it does because of unintentional draws.
Draws!
Yes. Yes. You're like, weird. Right, so
still win 45% on average.
Yeah. Like... So, but I would participate in that tournament probably, right? Although after like round 2, I would be like, why did I?
Why did I think of this?
Why are we here?
I mean, we could do this where round 1 is a rock mirror match, and then we can move on to more interesting mirror matches.
Oh, you mean,
what if everyone brings 2 decks, but one of the decks is always the rock?
Then I would always choose for my opponent to play the rock.
Yeah. And then your opponent would always choose for you.
Yeah. So you're already in that same situation. It could be like an invitational, right? Like a pre-modern invitational format where one of the 5 formats is the rock.
I mean, it should just be Dan, right? It's just rock. Like, just why both players same deck? Just do a stack.
Right. So
same graveyard. Haunting Echoes you. Haunting Echoes me.
You guys can happily continue the Lan H mirror match, but I've been podcasting for 3 hours already, and
classic Michael J exaggeration, 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Specifically set up the time so that we could podcast for 3 hours, and I could watch the basketball game I want to watch. Yeah, so I'm gonna leave, but you guys could keep talking.
No, we can sign off. Okay, Lan, do you got any plugs? I know you don't chase any clout, but
Yeah, I certainly don't chase any clout. So I do want to plug a fantastic podcast I've been listening to a lot. It's called Spike Colony.
Nice.
So if you guys haven't heard of it or haven't listened to it, I strongly recommend you listen to it. Two great hosts, Lanny and Michael J. Flores. So
thank you.
That's very sweet.
Thanks for coming on. This was a great episode.
Yeah. I had a great time. I mean, we always have a great time. We're just spitting, as Lan would say.
We're just rapping, man.
Yeah.
Three dudes rapping.
Yeah.
All right.
Love Spike Colony. Lobstercon registration opens either by the time you've heard this cast or shortly afterwards. Be sure, if not, you can try to last minute register for Sunny's tournament. If you ask nicely, otherwise just, keep your eyes peeled for our Spice tournament. That's going to be on Saturday the 21st or 28th. Lobstercon is September 20th and 21st. Highly suggest, I think, getting in on the 19th. Oh man, I forgot. No interest in playing old school, Mike or Lan?
Me? No, I'm going to play Premodern on day 2.
Double Premodern.
I told you. I'm spending all my extra equity buying beat up beta cards, right? And these are beat up beta commons like Fogs, Circle Protection Reds,
old school playable, all of them.
Yeah, just to run against. I guess I could just play Urg Raider, Holy Strength, Dark Ritual.
Right? Yeah, why not?
Worth Walpert likes to point out that he stopped me from playing Urg Raider at the 1999 Ohio Valley Regional Championship, and I basically played the same deck that I was going to play, but I replaced 4 Urg Raider with 4 Cursed Scroll. And I won that regional champion, whatever. I top 4'd that regional championship. And he anytime I say him, he's just like, "How was Urg Raider? Was it better or worse than Curse Scroll?" I'm like, I probably would have still won.
We can figure it out. Like in Burn, you can just take out the Curse Scrolls, play Earth Raiders.
So unnamed hero patron is offered to loan me old school cards for the old school champs. But what's also awkward is that Premodern side event is going to be at a separate location during old school champs. So if I wanted to play old school but hang out with my Premodern friends during the old school tournament in between rounds or after I crash out or whatever, like
why? Because the Premodern was so big last year.
Yeah. The cap is being increased to 80 for both side events. So X Point on Friday and Premodern on Saturday are going to be.
Lucas Glavin won the Friday old school event last year.
If I am at LobsterCon and you play the old school event because of the unnamed patron, I will just hang out with you at the old school event.
I mean, after talking to Sam, these old school decks just are so cool. Like, Underworld Dreams, Greed, just goblins, just straight goblins. I
do have 2 Underworld. The Underworld Dreams actually has one of my favorite quotes.
Is it like Shakespeare?
No, Rabindranath Tagore, who's a Bengali poet, won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1925, I think.
Well, do you want to hit us with it, or do you want me to read it?
All right. It is in the drowsy dark cave of the mind, dreams build their nest with fragments dropped from day's caravan.
Beautiful.
So, it was just like the phrasing was so weird. I was like, from day's caravan, and it made me think about it a lot. It's actually how I found out about Rabindranath Tagore. Huh. Because I was like, who's this bozo?
Yeah, Magic making us all more cultured, and it's only $68.
I have 2. If you want to borrow them, two Legends ones.
Well, unfortunately, I have to decide tomorrow morning, and I've fundamentally don't feel comfortable holding somebody's power, basically, and I just don't understand how the most popular way to play our $50,000 old school decks is around lots of open containers of beer,
unsleeved on a pool table. Was how people were playing it last year.
At least. That's that's just okay, how far can we take with this? But the average situation of just here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a beer and we're going to have a sleeved old school deck, maybe even double sleeved. It's still just kind of kind of flat. I understand that, there are people, there's 1%ers out there, right, who can do whatever. They can use Black Lotus as a coaster, right, as seen on Twitter. But the middle class of Sam Black, didn't buy his power when it was expensive. He has his power, and even maybe he's gotten some expensive pieces of power. He has all Black Border power now, so he has been collecting. But I don't imagine he's going to be happy to have some. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just assuming. But there's going to be people who don't want open containers around their old school cards. And if I'm borrowing old school cards, I even especially don't want to like deal with that, or just to have it like misplace my bag or something. Like it never happens, right? I never misplace my bag, but it's gonna happen the one time I'm holding.
All right, I'm gonna say my favorite.
We'll play Premodern. Anyways,
flavor text.
I'm saying we're
and then
playing
I'm gonna
Premodern.
sign off. Mine is from the card Grey Ogre. The ogre philosopher Nurdle believed the purpose of life was to live as high on the food chain as possible. She refused to eat vegetarians, preferring to live entirely on creatures that preyed on sentient beings.
The reason there's so much flavor text is because there's no
rules text.
Yeah.
Like this card doesn't produce a goblin shaman when it comes into play for 2 and an R.
But I am going to read some Tagore tonight because I'm reading the fantastic history, The Anarchy, which is about the East India Company. So it feels very on brand.
Oh, delightful.
Right.
This has been Spy Colony 36. Love Spy Colony. Love
Thanks, Lan.
the 5 Chinese brothers.
Oh, the 5 Chinese brothers. I'll give you a copy.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cavs.
Game over.